No, Chair, just Johnny.
Right, good. And Dennis, very quickly, do you want to add anything to our meeting yesterday?
Thanks very much, Chairperson. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, look, I don't think the discussion that was held yesterday really fits in with the fiscal framework. It was a very particular set of circumstances. The individual cases, as mentioned, have really got nothing to do with us as a committee. I think those must be dealt with through SARS. If we can facilitate that, that's marvelous. The bigger issue is this double taxing, the question around double taxing. The reality is that the first 10 minutes of the meeting were spent explaining who all they have spoken to in the past. And you know, they really have aerated this with 2 finance ministers, numerous tax officials, etc., etc. I just think that, you know, realistically, getting an answer back to them is the most important issue. No one really seems to have given them a good, solid, you know, this is a line in the sand type answer. If we can facilitate that, that'll be marvelous. But also a question to SARS, you know, is there double taxation? They know the details. SARS has been on this journey for quite some time. So if there is an issue, let's scrutinize it and see if there is a little bit of unfairness in the system. But yeah, I think that the meeting yesterday was, it was reasonably constructive. And yeah, thank you to the chair.
All right, thank you very much. We sat with them for 1 hour and 17 minutes. I know there were practical arrangements. You know, Dennis had in particular, but me too, and we had to forego all of that. We're not making much of a claim for that. It's our job as parliamentarians. How often do we have this situation? The misunderstanding, I must stress, is mainly on their side. I have spoken in Kululeko, and it's very, very clear that it was made very, very clear to them that it's a virtual meeting. And indeed, to be fair, lest the public out there and the journalists think we're insensitive and so on. Actually, they've been in Cape Town since the 13th of February. They've been lobbying here, apparently. So I must say, in fairness, the committee secretaries did nothing that they need to account to this committee for. And finally, you know, I'm not sure what more we could have done. They got 1 hour, 17 minutes. And but you see, we are Parliament, colleagues, comrades, friends. We are Parliament. We can't operate like the way the department does, or even a minister does. Well, I can't speak for the ministers whom they saw. They saw the current minister too recently. We can't, when people cry before us, whatever the legitimacy or otherwise of their case, we can't like, what is Parliament? You know, we're supposed to respond to people. And whatever their claims, however legitimate or otherwise, we have to respond to them. So let's start, Treasury, we briefed you with that. Colleagues, if you have to spill over 12 o'clock, well, we have to because we got this issue. So let's start there. I think Dennis puts it prettily best. He says, is there a double taxation and do you think it's fair? Okay, Younger, it's a policy issue, I understand. SARS just implements what you do, passes policy via us, and ultimately it's our decision, okay? Remember, it's we ultimately, not ultimately, fundamentally who pass the laws. They come as Treasury with the bills, okay? With the minister's consent and cabinet's consent. So ultimately, it's a bill that we, well, the apartheid government passed, and we have 29 long years to consider changing it. So years are before us. Ultimately, we have to decide. Okay, Treasury, start with this widow's voice so that we reply to them. Secondly, I agree with Dennis. They need a proper reply. EDC, Zulu, and whatever language they want. Right, over to you, Younger. Let's start with you very quickly.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to the members. To answer the question raised by Honorable Dennis Ryder, is there a double taxation? No, it is not a double taxation because when the spouses are contributing during their lifetime, it is that contribution is tax deductible. It's exempt. So it's tax deductible because we've got a system of EET in our retirement. So that contribution is tax deductible. So there is no double taxation if we have to answer that question. And we want to say in this platform that we have met with the widows and we have responded to them. We have met with them on 10 and 11 December 2018, 18 March 2019, 4 April 2019. And all those meetings, we empathize because the issue is the tax burden that they face at the end of the year, because according to the tax law, they receive two sources of income. And we explained this to them. Here is the widow receiving two sources of taxable income, two sources of income which is subject to tax, because those contributions were not taxable, they were tax deductible. And here is a single parent who is receiving two sources of income, maybe because he's working at SPA and also working at another job. So the issue is it's two sources of income, and both sources of income were not subject to tax before. So in terms of the Income Tax Act, you have to add those sources of income, hence you end up going to a higher bracket because you have two sources of income. So after the meetings with them, changes were made to the legislation. We met with them in Pretoria, we met with them in Cape Town, we met with them in Bishop on 4 of April 2019. So Treasury went to the offices in Bishop. We went to the offices in Cape Town, they came here. And in all those meetings, we explained clearly the scenario to them, and I was there, so as to explain the scenario in Nguni language, so as to make them understand. So we have done that, and SARS was going to do taxpayer education, and we said that if there are issues of debt compromise, then they have to go to SARS. After all those meetings, we made changes in the legislation. So that 1962 legislation was changed so as to take away the shock of an unexpected tax bill at the end of the year because of earning two sources of income. So what we did, we said the pension fund administrator, they have to apply a certain tax rate, withholding tax, so that at the end of the year, the widows are not faced with a big tax burden. So you smoothen it out throughout the year. And we explained that to them. And during our meetings, we also met with Government Employee Pension Fund. They were present in our meetings here in Pretoria when we met also with the widows, because Momo was clear that everyone, National Treasury, SARS, and GPF should be present in those meetings. So the widows we can give concrete responses. So the changes were made to the 1962 Act so as to take into account those issues raised by the widows. So I want to reiterate, there is no double taxation because the contributions were tax deductible. In terms of the tax system, is two sources of income, and it will be difficult to differentiate between a single parent who receives two sources of income and a widow who also receives two sources of income. And changes were made in the law to ease the tax burden by making provision for a pension fund administrator to deduct or withhold throughout the year. Thank you. I don't know if Franz from SARS want to add regarding the administration tax.
Franz?
Thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate an offer we have made in the past, which is that if we can be given a list of the members of the group that are being affected, we can reach out to them and see if any of the debt payment arrangement or compromise provisions in the current legislation can be applied to assist. I think that is something we can certainly look at, and I believe some have taken us up on that. But if we want to do it on the basis where we're given a list, where we reach out and where we then interact directly, we can do that. Obviously, that is an offer that is open to all taxpayers. They can approach a SARS office if they are having difficulties in paying a tax debt to get to payment arrangements, and in very difficult cases, perhaps even reach a compromise with SARS on the debt that is to be paid. Now, obviously, that is something that is done on an individual level. We have to look at the financial circumstances of each taxpayer individually. It's not something you can do on a blanket basis. But if we have a list, at least we can, from our side, initiate the process as well. And we can take it from there. I know that the committee has suggested that perhaps a report would be required. I think I should just mention that clearly any report that we would provide would have to take taxpayer confidentiality into account, so we wouldn't be able to drill into detail, but we could perhaps give broad trends of, you know, how many people say took us up on the offer, how many had reached out to that we'd reached out to had in fact come through and worked with us, and then what the results were in aggregate. That's something we could certainly consider. So thank you very much, Chair.
Yeah, that's exactly what I did say. I said, obviously, we know you can't reveal information about each individual, nor do we want it. It's the very laws that we passed in this or the previous apartheid parliament that provided for that. We've never disagreed with it. Okay, so fine, Frans. Basically, can you move on to your other issues? We'll come back and collectively discuss all the issues raised on all the matters. And just to say that we weren't aware, Younger, we got some overview, to be fair to them, of their many meetings. And we know it's been, this issue's been dragging on since 2015, but I wasn't aware, I'm not sure Dennis was either, that you have effected some legislation. Now, Dennis has covered me already. He says, and it's correct, it's about what I was about to say. Can you summarize in no more than a page all of these meetings and what are outcomes, and just refer to the particular bills and laws that you have proposed amendments to and that we've passed? And then we will do what Frans suggests, but obviously the meeting will decide, and the report will be submitted on Tuesday, and members can look at the actual crafting of the proposal and decide and discuss it further on Tuesday. We've got a whole 3-hour session there. But for now, can we move on, please, to the other issues, because there are many other stakeholders whose replies are warranted here, and let's go for it. Is that okay, members? Anybody objecting? We'll come back to this if people have strong views, and they can certainly express them when they have a chance to reply. I don't see any hands up, so let's move on, please. You've got 45 minutes, no more, please. If in fact, you can clip it down to 40, that'll be great. It's more important here, the stakeholders, Younger, and your team.
Yeah, Chair.
And they had a raw deal, okay? We've said in our, oh, you're here, DG, acting DG. Look, you weren't here, Momo, on Wednesday, right? The second half, unfortunately, of the submissions weren't even engaged on. So in today's discussion, we'll give them more time than the first half of those submissions on Wednesday. Right, go for it, Momo.
Okay, no, thank you, Chair. And I think, you know, Younger has responded to the challenges faced by widows, which we've just tried to outline, and the changes that we've made, and we'll touch on it in these slides as well. So, Chair, maybe just to move on to the next slide. As you know, we're here to respond to all the many comments that we've received. I think we always welcome these hearings. I think it's an essential part of our democracy. And we always hope for some vibrant points being made. We're not just looking for praises, looking for criticisms, because that's how we learn as well. However, having said that, there are, I think it also does reflect often, I think, strong political or ideological positions some would take. Some would not want to deal with trade-offs and so on, because the budget obviously is essentially, I always say, should never be a bean counting process. It should be driven by policy. But having said that, we have to take into account what are existing commitments in any budget, whether it's staff, whether it's other contractual commitments. You can't just change from the nature of spending in a department immediately. And I think that we have been through tough times. So certainly certain budgets have not grown as much as we want them to. But you know, we need to look at the mix of all of these things. So, you know, these were some of the submissions that we were aware of and which were provided in writing, and some of them certainly came to make presentations in Parliament. We've always had Treasury officials present throughout, hearing the inputs. Next slide, please. So, Chair, we've divided our response into 6 areas. starting with the economic strategy or economic policy. As I said, it's policy that guides the budget and its priorities and how the allocations that are available beyond the commitments are actually allocated. We then deal with just to emphasize the key points in our fiscal stance, and then we look at tax and fiscal policy, and then of course to deal with ESCOM debt and other matters. Chair, and I want to start by saying, we do pride ourselves as Treasury that we are fully transparent, and in fact, we do look forward to any proposals about how we can improve transparency and how we can improve how we report. So I want to just deal with, we will deal with some issues raised on the accounting treatment. I just want to make the point that if you look at the budget review, we were upfront about the change in accounting treatment. We have an annexure it's an online annexure on the accounting treatment. So there was no attempt, as some journalists say, sleight of hand. This was set to one and all. We can still differ on whether we were right in doing it, and we certainly are having and continue to have many technical discussions, including with the IMF, that's an expert in this area, to see whether we've got it right, because sometimes we haven't been perhaps as right as we thought we were in the past, and we've done it now. Whether we're fully consistent or not, a lot of those, I think, are areas that we want to deal with. We'll deal with those technical issues in this presentation, but it shouldn't detract, I think, from the big trade-offs that we are making and what we had to do with ESCOM and how we sort of seeing it as a balance sheet matter that we've had to deal with. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to ask Edgar, since he's the head of the budget office, to come in. I'll come in on specific areas, and there are other members of our team. We are all together. We've got several DDGs, but we'll introduce them as they respond to any specific issues. Edgar?
Through you, Chair. I'm going to try and move quite briskly, given the fact that we do have time limitations. As the acting DG indicated, we do have other colleagues on the line who will also deal with any follow-up questions. But also, there'll be a couple of us going through the slides, particularly on the tax policy side. I'll ask Mr. Chris Axelson to come in on those slides. But Chair, let me begin by just indicating that we are fully aware of, and really it is our main point of departure, that what we really need is we need economic growth. We need much higher levels of growth to address unemployment and poverty. And that really is the foundation of the economic recovery and reconstruction plan that the President presented to the country at the end of 2021, which we fully support and have sought to support in the fiscal proposals that are being made before Parliament in order to encourage investment, accelerate progress on these reforms, and of course, improve the capability of the state in respect of its mandate. We also consider that policy, as we've seen in numerous countries around the world, needs to be an enabler for growth and employment. And what that means, among other things, is that policy needs to ameliorate the risks that we see in the global economy, not add to those risks. And what we've seen is cautionary tales in numerous places around the world where policymakers have tried to engage in policies that have not necessarily yielded the results that they want, because we do operate in a global environment. We're not in a bubble. We have to consider the actual outcomes of policy rather than just what we desire in making the decisions. And this is important because we need to have buffers for the shocks that are there and that will happen and that have happened. We need to create space for the socioeconomic priorities of government to be implemented rather than constrain those by allowing, for instance, debt and debt service costs to rise unreasonably. And I think in this regard, this is what Momo is talking about in respect of trade-offs. It's one thing to say you want to spend money on a whole bunch of things. It's another thing entirely if, like we are, you're in a deficit position, and therefore that will mean that you're going to borrow more money and you're going to end up with high debt service costs. You've got to balance those things. You've also got to balance the issue of the savings that you need in order to actually have sufficient investment into future growth. And so, Chair, in conclusion, the reform agenda seeks to complement the macroeconomic framework and to rebuild the functioning of the economy. Firstly, we know that no matter what we say, one thing that we have to realize is without electricity and a functioning transport and logistics system, you're not going to get growth. And so it's important that fiscal policy and other policies support addressing those binding constraints, which is part of what's in the budget. And in addition to that, the interventions and operation of Vulindlela in respect of supporting the ERRP, which I touched on earlier, are absolutely critical. So in thinking about how to make sure the economy grows, that jobs are created, that livelihoods are lifted up, we have to think about the kinds of investment that need to be made rather than just simply making expenditure available so that everybody can spend. This budget targets specific things. One of the big things in this budget is that we're making big injections into public sector infrastructure. And also we're making big injections into fighting crime and corruption, which is another major hindrance to economic growth. Key points on the fiscal stance as reflected in the budget 2023. As I indicated, the budget supports the President's Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Program. It makes targeted expenditure injections. It proposes no spending cuts. It does not raise taxes on South Africans who are under considerable pressure at this point. It protects the social wage. Indeed, the percentage that we spend on the social wage, as we will show later on, Chair and honorable members, is higher today than it was in the pre-pandemic period as a percentage of non-interest expenditure. And we will show that to the committee. And indeed, the budget seeks to, from a balancing perspective, control the growth in debt and debt service costs, because the higher debt service costs are, Chair and honorable members, the less money we've got to actually achieve those socioeconomic objectives that we all agree need to be achieved. Secondly, the budget does not support the damaging practice of incrementalism. We noted that a lot of the presentations made assumed that items of non-interest expenditure must simply grow, and that to the extent that a lack of growth is observed, this is somehow a problem. We don't support this view. We believe that a straight line CPI-based growth of spending items across the board is not appropriate, and we will show why that is the case. Indeed, we propose that the budget should place a greater emphasis on the actual performance of specific programs. We also need to be aware of the fact that there are instances of waste, Honorable Chair and honorable members, and that if we simply add money to budgets without taking into account efficiency and waste issues, that's not a smart way of budgeting, and we need to make strategic trade-offs. Some things need to be prioritized in the short term, while others need to be prioritized over the long term. So, in essence, the budget is proposing no tax increases. It is proposing additional spending of 227 billion rands, including for the COVID-19 social relief of distress, as well as increased investment. We're adding money to local government, including for free basic electricity. as well as additional spending on safety and security, education, and health services. Deficit is not expected to improve to zero. So to the issue about austerity, non-austerity, we're not proposing a balanced budget. We're still in deficit and we will remain in deficit over the next medium term. And it remains supportive in that regard of the economy. Fiscal policy does not target a specific level for the primary surplus. And this is particularly important in respect of some of the comments were made, particularly one presentation on the impact of the Eskom debt relief arrangement on the primary balance, which we consider are not really, they're beside the point of the policy position on the primary surplus. Debt service costs will continue to rise, Honorable Chair and Honorable Members. Gross borrowing requirements will continue to increase, and this is very important. And indeed, we make it very clear in the budget that because of the Eskom debt relief arrangement, debt does increase, and that the impact of Eskom debt relief is negative on the overall fiscal outlook. Chair, I'm going to ask, with your permission, Mr. Chris Axelson to take us through the responses on some of the tax policy issues that were raised during the hearings. Chris?
Thanks, Ike. Good morning, Honourable Chair, Honourable Members. I'll just try and run through these tax issues quite quickly. We've had a number of comments. The one was on the tax to GDP ratio and the fact that we aren't including some of the revenue that the country gets and that it's an incorrect methodology. This is just to say that we follow the IMF's Government Finance Statistics Manual. There are other methodologies out there, and the OECD is another different type of methodology. They do publish what they think the tax to GDP ratio is, including those. It's about 2.5 percentage points higher than ours. We're not trying to hide anything there. There is also talk about this target of 25% of GDP. I mean, this is just to reiterate that the Minister of Finance hasn't indicated a specific tax to GDP target that we are working towards. If we can improve revenues without raising taxes through higher improved administration, that would be fantastic and would allow for greater social expenditures. There were a lot of comments on increasing taxes on upper incomes and introducing new taxes. We've responded to those in previous budget response documents. But our view in this budget review is that we are trying to avoid tax increases, especially as the economy is in a very vulnerable position and it needs to recover. Growth next year or this year for 2023 is only forecast to be below 1%, which is quite low, and increasing taxes in a very weak growth environment actually has a larger detrimental impact on economic growth than when you increase taxes in other periods. And this has been shown in some of the researches that has been done on fiscal policy over the last couple of years. On the health promotion levy, sorry, if we can just go back one. On the health promotion levy, there was some disappointment expressed that we delayed the increase in the health promotion levy, and they were saying that this is undermining the reason for the levy in the first place, and it has actually been successful in reducing the consumption of sugary drinks, especially amongst low-income individuals, which would then have a knock-on health impact. The minister did announce that it would be delayed in consultation with a couple of other ministers, just to recognize the impact of floods as well as social unrest for that industry, and the fact that that industry does need to transform. They are working on a master plan where they can hopefully restructure. On the renewable energy tax incentives for rooftop solar, there was a question from a number of commentators about why only solar PV panels and why not batteries and inverters. The main focus here for us, which we discussed in person earlier in the week, was we're trying to focus on additional generation. Additional generation is really what has wider economic benefits to the whole of the country. If we're going to offer a tax incentive for households that can afford to install these systems, there does need to be a wider economic benefit. Batteries themselves, for example, don't add to generation. They reduce the impact of load shedding, but they won't have a wider economic benefit. So we wanted to focus in on the additional generation to try and reduce load shedding as far as possible. Next slide. Sorry, I think I've just lost the slides. And let me see if I can talk to them separately. Okay, so why was the rooftop solar set at 15,000, the cap, and why did you have the cap? So the cap was included because we do have limited fiscal space. We are still trying to reduce our debt and get to a stable level of debt, and this is especially difficult with the further ESCOM additions to the debt profile. So because of that limited fiscal space, we couldn't have an unlimited amount that could be claimed, as well as we did need to put in a cap to try and preserve some progressivity of the measure. Without a cap, a lot of individuals would be able to claim much, much higher amounts, and those would most likely be higher income households. So why was it only extended for 1 year and 2 years, the rooftop solar and the 12B? This is because we really want immediate investments. If you go to the next slide, sorry. We're trying to promote investments to take place as soon as possible to try and help with this emergency in the energy sector. There were some suggestions we should have just zero rated a VAT on solar panels. It would be easier and more effective. We don't agree with that view. You know, the research we've seen on zero rating in other countries and some here is that a lot of the price difference actually just goes straight to the producers. So the producers don't reduce the prices after you zero rate a product, because as Treasury and as government, we don't have any say over what the actual price should be. So we can't force the price to go down by 15%. And what has been seen in these cases is if you zero rate a product, the price doesn't actually go down by much and the producers get all the benefit. And then it doesn't help with additional demand either. Also, our zero rating system is really focused on poverty alleviation. This would be quite a stark departure from that principle if we were then to zero rate solar panels for higher income households. Next slide. Thanks. So why was the diesel refund only extended to manufacturers of foodstuffs and not retailers? This has come into some question. So from our perspective, you know, there are two sectors that get the current refund, and that is the mining sector and the agricultural sector. And that's right at the bottom of the value chain. We wanted to do one step up from that value chain and try and stay as close to manufacturers and agricultural industry as possible, which would, the next step would be the manufacturers of foodstuffs. There could also potentially be a fewer number of these larger manufacturers. If we were to go to retailers, it would be a very big jump from the primary sector, and also it would be almost impossible to administer, both from SARS and from a claimant's perspective. If we had every single retailer in the country that then used some diesel potentially for a generator, and then they were to
is it just me, or are we all losing you? Hello, Chris?
Hi, Chair. Sorry, are you losing me?
No, he's loud and clear. He's loud and clear.
No, now you're clear. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Was it just me losing him that time?
No, we can hear him.
Can somebody say if it's all of us?
We can hear him clearly, Chair.
He has to repeat what he said. Ready? Oh, okay. Just thank you. It's just me. Oh, okay, fine. Go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry,
okay,
Chair. Thank
fine.
you. Okay, so it was the administrative concerns that didn't allow us to extend it all the way out to retailers. We will see how the progress goes by extending it to the manufacturers initially. There are a lot of administratively onerous requirements, both for SARS and claimants in this diesel refund system. So we did need to be wary of that. On the employment tax incentive, there were some concerns that we're not following evidence-based policy making by continuing with the incentive. We're not trying to, put forward a view that isn't in line with the recommendations or research. So there were some reviews that were done in NEDLAC, including independent reviews and some of our own internal reviews. And those reviews did find a small but positive impact of the employment tax incentive. We then put forward for a 5-year extension of the incentive, and it was actually the NEDLAC social partners that asked for the incentive to be extended for 10 years, which was more than what we had asked for. We then shared those reports with the committee, so it's not as if we've been hiding anything from the committee, because we shared them with the committee, and only once those reports were shared was it then put through in legislation. Further research from then has been mixed. So some have shown a small positive benefit, some have shown no impact at all. The latest paper actually shows that with the data and the methodologies available, you can't tell either way. So you can't tell whether it's made any positive impact, and you also can't tell whether it's not had an impact. which is quite important. So it is quite mixed. It's not quite clear. We put a slide right at the end, which has a link to all the research that's available, and committee members are happy to go and look at that. I can't see the slides again, but I'll just go from the slides that I have. And I think that covers all of them because we covered the widows issue previously. Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Eka.
Thank you, Chair. We're just having a connectivity issue, so we're trying to get the slides back up. So I do apologize. It's a technical matter that I don't know.
But you can speak to it in the meanwhile, my friend. You can speak with your eyes closed, please, right? Yeah, and we've got the document. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair. No, I appreciate that. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, but try to put it back on, but we have got it, right? So if people want to, they can refer to it in the email that Teboho and others have. Yeah, okay, but go ahead, please.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chair. We'll seek to put it up, but let me just go through. We're in slide number 11 of the presentation. What we are, I think the point that we're trying to make is that there's a considerable amount of spending that's proposed. However, at the same time, we have to be careful in thinking about the points that have been made around fiscal stimulus, because the relationship between government spending and higher economic growth is not as certain as some commentators have said, because essentially what members and the rest of us are being told is that we need to essentially simply inject more spending. But to inject more spending when you're in a deficit position means you need to borrow more money. And when you borrow more money, that means that you pay more in interest on that debt. And the interest that you pay on that debt, and indeed the dynamics of the overall stock of borrowing by itself, including things like redemptions and refinancing implications and so on and so forth, actually extract from the growth that you think you're getting by adding money to expenditure. Depending on where you are basically in the debt curve, you could actually end up with less growth than more growth. So in slide number 11, we show the historical relationship between government spending on a non-interest expenditure basis and the actual growth in the economy. And as you can see, Honorable Chair and Honorable Members, it is not a historical fact, if you look at the evidence, that in fact, simply spending more money will result in economic growth. Indeed, there have been several periods of time where we have had, where we've increased spending, which is shown by the maroon bars in the graph on the top left-hand corner. And the result has been that growth has been lower. So I think what we are saying is that a balanced approach is necessary in respect of fiscal policy. Indeed, since the global financial crisis, we have increased expenditure in real terms quite consistently. And the only thing we've gotten from increasing that expenditure is more debt, not more growth, and certainly not more employment. And so I think what we're saying in a nutshell, we have to be cautious in that regard in how we look at it. Looking at slide number 12, we talk here about the issue that I raised earlier on. A number of commentators.
Sorry, I don't mean to be rude, but just to alert you to the fact that you're at 25 minutes, 36 seconds. What's worrying me is that you're only on this slide here. Now, remember that this is a budget hearings, so we have to give enough space to civil society. Your document is very clear. You do a summary, we put that into the report, and civil society, there's 14 of them here. So I don't know if you can, and members can read. They it's very, very clearly put out. Whether we agree or not, we can understand what's there. So in short, can you please take that into account? But I'm not able to. Look, the committee must decide as a whole. If the majority want you to speak for more than 45 minutes, I'm fine with that. But for now, it doesn't seem fair to civil society stakeholders. That's all. Very quickly. Thanks. Sorry.
Okay. Thanks, Chair. While I get the technology up and running.
Please go ahead in the meanwhile. We have it. I'm staring at your slide now on my screen. Yeah, my computer screen.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chair.
I mean, my own screen. In other words, I've got your email, the email part here. So we have it. We have all got computers and iPhones and cell phones or whatever phones we have. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. I can be, if I'm given the ability to share, I will be able to put it back up, but for now, I'll continue.
Now focus on the content for now. Others will do that. Yeah, Nkululeko and Ellen will help your team on that side. Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. So, Chair, it's just a simple point on incrementalism. Our view is that a number of the comments around that this doesn't grow, that doesn't grow, and so on and so forth, in our view, are a little bit beside the point in respect of actual proper budgeting. What you need to do, in our view, going forward, is you need to focus on targeted injections. There are numerous examples of underspending, poor outcomes, waste, inefficiency. I can go on and on and on. Last year, Chair, government departments underspent their budgets by 17.9 billion rands. And so the question that we're asking is, well, if departments can't spend the money they already have, why is it an issue that we should immediately talk about? Well, more money should be added. That's the first thing. The second thing is, should it not be the case that we should spend more time assessing what's already in the baseline and whether or not it's actually being used to achieve the results that we want, including in the critical areas, whether it's health or education and so on and so forth. The fact that an area is a critical policy area does not necessarily mean that we should not assess what's in the baseline and whether what's in the baseline is being used appropriately. And I think that that's an issue that has been lost sight of in the conversations around, that's not growing or this is not growing and so on and so forth. And that's beside what I've already said with respect to the issue of waste. In that context, Chair, it is useful for me to reflect to the committee the fact that there actually have been instances where departments have found very useful savings and as a result have been able to improve their performance without necessarily getting the kinds of increases that people assume they should get. And in slide number 13 and in slide number 14, we reflect some of those examples. I can now, it looks like, put the slides up, but we reflect some of those.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, some of those examples of where departments have actually been able to make those savings if the accounting officers and the accounting authorities, as well as the executive authorities, are willing to take those steps. We're seeing examples of those savings, and that, I think, is a good development going forward for the budget. I'm not going to go through each example, including here on slide 14, but it underlines the point that I have made. Moving on then, I've already spoken to the issue of underspending. Many times, departments and others ask the Treasury to recommend additional injections into budgets, including for places where people are not spending the money that they currently have. And I think that we need to ask that question because it is a cause for concern. That in fact, departments are not actually spending the allocations that are currently there. Turning to the issue of social spending, Chairperson, particularly because a number of stakeholders raised this, and I think a lot of the points come from a very good place with very positive intentions. But I think we do have to point out a couple of things. When we consider decisions around what to do with social spending, whether it's the social relief of distress grant, proposals around a basic income grant, etc., we have to understand the starting point. The first thing that we would say, Chair, is, as reflected in this slide, we as a government do spend a significant amount on social transfers, and transfers to households, as I indicated earlier, are higher today as a percentage of total consolidated expenditure than they were pre the pandemic period. So we've actually seen an increase, not a decrease, as a share of consolidated expenditure to transfers to households. Indeed, when we compare to other countries around the world, South Africa spends a very significant amount on social assistance. This is not to say that we are saying that we shouldn't be spending on social assistance. This is just a reflection on the background and where we currently are sitting. Indeed, Chair, considerations around social grants are a profound fiscal issue, because essentially we are talking about a redistribution of resources within the current tax base to other sections of the population. But also we have to talk about why the social relief of distress grant was created in the first place. When we think about the future, we had a decision that was made because of the pandemic, and as a result of the lockdowns, there were a number of people, particularly people involved in manual labor, who were unable to work. The social relief of distress grant, as announced by the president in 2020, was specifically to address the fact that a number of people engaged in those activities were not allowed to work, and that those people needed to be provided with assistance. The question that we have to ask ourselves is, going forward, what is the best way of addressing the challenges of that affect those people now that we are moving into a post-COVID environment? Any decision can be made, and we are not prescribing a decision here. It's very important that I make that clear. But all we are saying is that we have to be cognizant of the current fiscal and economic environment when we take those decisions going forward. Chair, on the public sector wage bill, I'm not going to spend a lot of time except to say that there was one presenter who, in our view, made the incorrect statement that there is 0% budgeted for the wage bill. That is not the case. There's a considerable amount in the wage bill. There might be views that this is unsatisfactory by some, and we understand that, but it's not quite accurate to say that 0% is budgeted for the wage bill going forward. It's also important to understand the starting point of the wage bill. We have previously presented information about the size of the wage bill in South Africa compared to other countries. I think that in that regard, what we're saying is that even though we continue, of course, having these discussions and having negotiations, the one wage bill, we have to also understand the starting point and where we are in that regard. Turning to the Eskom debt relief arrangement. As indicated in the budget, the Eskom debt relief arrangement provides 254 billion rands in over the next 3 years in debt relief to Eskom. Right? And this will take the form of loan advances over that 3-year period, as well as another amount that takes over 70 billion rand of Eskom's loan portfolio in 2025-26. This is effected through a separate piece of legislation called the Eskom Debt Relief Bill, because of the loans that are extended. The loans will remain payable to government until the conditions which are outlined in Annexure W3 of the budget review are actually met. Only upon compliance with the conditions will the settlement actually happen. And this is a fundamental part of what we're proposing. And Chair and honorable members, what we're saying is we need to depart from the practice of the past, where we simply dish out money to Eskom without any accountability. And this is important, and this is critical in respect of the future. And this actually could have implications for how we deal with state-owned corporations going forward. We understand that a number of commentators, including one of the presenters that spent a considerable amount of time on the issue of the debt relief, have expressed skepticism about this, and they have a right to be skeptical, particularly given the history. But what we're saying, Chair, is the fact that there is a risk that things might not work out is not a good enough reason to not try a different approach. And that's what this budget is proposing. It's proposing an approach that gives us a better opportunity to achieve a different result, and we have to try. It's also important that the debt relief arrangement is understood as being net negative for the fiscal outlook. One of the commentators said that we are artificially improving the fiscal position of government in the way that we're doing the accounting treatment. We are obviously not. Indeed, we've said the exact opposite. We have said that as a result of Eskom debt relief, gross borrowing requirements of government worsen, and that in fact other fiscal matrices worsen. The fiscal framework takes the debt relief into account through debt service costs. And if you compare debt service costs in the budget table last week, they are worse than what they were at the time of the MTBPS. We also considered that this is somewhat of a technical issue from a fiscal perspective, but as I've indicated, it is critical for ensuring accountability on the part of Eskom. It is untrue that the treatment improves the fiscal outlook. National Treasury has never claimed that it improves the fiscal outlook. So the argument that somehow we're trying to do this is in our view, a bit of a straw man. It's tilting at windmills. There's no one on the other side of that argument. We're not disagreeing with the point that it worsens the fiscal outlook. Indeed, that's exactly what happens. But it is also untrue that somehow the primary fiscal surplus is dependent on Eskom debt relief. Even if one adds the previous Eskom bailout back into non-interest expenditure, there's still a primary surplus over the MTEF. So this is a factually incorrect assessment that has been made. It's also important to indicate that finance bills for debt relief are not by themselves unprecedented. Indeed, Parliament passed a debt relief in 2009 in respect of one of the provinces. And so it's not unprecedented to try and deal with a balance sheet transaction through a debt relief bill. There was a point made about SANRAL. SANRAL, Honorable Chair and Honorable Members, is not being loaned money, but rather SANRAL is being given a revenue replacement because government decided not to implement, at the political level at least, a revenue-raising system for SANRAL in the form of e-tolls in Gauteng. Eskom is receiving a loan, which must be repaid if conditions are not met. And so this is a critical point that we want to make. Chair, I'm not going to deal with the debt path slide because here we're saying that we're confirming that the debt relief program increases government borrowings. It doesn't make government's fiscal outlook better, it makes it worse. And so we've always been upfront about that point. And as the acting DG indicated, we've been transparent about the impact. Chair, turning to other SOCs that have been raised in the public hearings, we note the fact that the problem of SOE bailouts is becoming one of the biggest fiscal risks and has become one of the biggest fiscal risks. It is important that we take a different approach that emphasizes conditions. And in this regard, we've already spoken to what we're doing in respect of Eskom, but also preconditionality is now going to become a major part of every disbursement of funds to SOEs. And so that's an important development. The preliminary framework for managing bailouts to state-owned companies will be published this month for consultation and will thereafter be submitted to Cabinet for approval. And so we're taking a different approach. Notwithstanding the skepticism that has been expressed, we're trying something different in order to achieve a different result. Chair, there were some questions around the government employees pension fund somehow being used to provide debt relief. This is an important and very critical point to address because there are some serious dangers in this regard. The Government Employees Pension Fund, Honorable Chair, and the PIC invests money of civil servants. It is the pensions of government employees around the country. It's not money that's just sitting there. It is the money of government employees that must be paid out when they retire. The Minister of Finance is not empowered to participate in the investment decisions of the GEPF. And so the GEPF must be independent to invest money in order to protect and to increase the value of the pensions of the members of the civil service. Once you start saying that they must be politically instructed to invest in this or to invest in that, you're entering into pretty dangerous territory. And that will have implications for the valuation of those assets, including the valuation of assets held by other investors. Chair, then going on to other matters, there were various other matters that were raised. For example, on gender responsive budgeting, Cabinet has endorsed that a process on gender responsive budgeting should be undertaken, and an interdepartmental steering committee has been appointed and is considering proposals for a framework in this regard. There were also issues raised around FATF, A multidisciplinary effort under the leadership of the National Treasury is heavily focused on addressing the FATF grey listing, which was announced last week. And those are the points that are there in that regard. Thirdly, a question was raised around the Southern African Customs Union and the revenue sharing formula for SACU. The revenue sharing formula is available publicly. It is published in the 2002 SACU agreement, Part 7, Article 34A. We can forward it to the relevant parties, but it is available publicly. The formula is transparent to the public and can be explained if needed by stakeholders who desire an explanation. We can provide it. It's also important to indicate, Chair, that of course this is a multi-country arrangement. It involves discussions at the diplomatic level among both.
You have 42 minutes, so please round up, but I'll ask the committee what they want. Okay, let's do it now. Okay, committee members, please indicate. I'm suggesting that we allow them a few more minutes beyond the 45, but that we move on to the stakeholders and then come back to them. You will have another opportunity, Edgar, and your team. But now, what do members feel? Is it fine if we close them down and not close down, stop now for in the next 5 minutes or so? Very quickly, is anybody opposed to it? Please put your hand up. Or yeah, Jutoy? Mr.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Honourable Chair, these are two matters pertaining to point 3 and 4 of SACU and the CMA. It's quite important. I think if we can just have a comprehensive explanation on them. It's a lot of money. Please, don't cut this one short.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, good. Anything else? I don't see any other hand up. Do you in Kululeko, Ellen? No. All right. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, look, we can give you another 5-6 minutes. Yeah. And then you can, if you want, Mr. Jutoy, you can ask for a fuller reply in writing. Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair and honorable members. So just to underline, the Southern African Customs Union, for everybody, very brief background.
By the way, Edgar, the question that Professor Rousseau asked, we did not ask for the formula, we also asked for the actual calculations used for the SACU and CMC payments to be published, okay?
That's
yes,
no
so
problem.
that's not a problem. 100%.
Good.
So,
fine, good, let's go for it.
Okay. And the same is true for the common monetary area. All of that can be provided. There were questions around the public participation. Chair, for the sake of time, we're not going to go through each of the things that we've done on public participation here, but there is a slide in this presentation that everybody can go through on the various aspects of public participation that we've undertaken over the last number of years. Needless to say, we've spent a lot of time, including advertising it through the media. I personally appeared on the SABC to publicize a public participation process and a call for inputs prior to the 2022 MTBPS. But of course, as Momo was indicating earlier, we're open to suggestions that can be practically applied within the legal timeframes that we have for actually tabling the budget that are obviously the ultimate constraint. There was an issue that was raised about requiring, and Chair, you must forgive me if I'm not necessarily stating it 100% accurately, but there was an issue raised about requiring public officials and government political office bearers to purchase locally manufactured vehicles. We understand that this matter had previously been raised over a period of time, particularly with the presidency. Chair, we can commit to pass on the concerns to the presidency. In our understanding, the ministerial handbook provides information around the purchasing things like vehicles. And this, of course, is something that the presidency basically decides on. And so we can commit to taking that further with them, in other words, passing it on and asking them to obviously take that into account from the committee. The other issues around the local content in respect of purchasing, which is a policy that is under the purview of the Department of Trade and Industry and Competition. And so we also commit to pass that on to them. Chair, as I said, I'm not going to go through the public participation. The people can read and I suppose can follow up with us as it goes on. I'm going to stop there, Chair. The rest is a lot of detailed information that people can read. And so I'll stop there. We can take questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry about this, but we have to move on. Yeah, just on the second to last matter, on this matter of the cast, or it's dragging on for too long. We have sent you the letter. There was just one acknowledgement from women in the presidency. I engaged with Gerard Konov at least 12, 14 times verbally. I engaged with the deputy minister. I don't think you should keep shunting it from one to the other. We want a reply within 14 days. Any civil society organization has a right to a reply. And 6 years later, or is it 5 years later, Alan? It's unacceptable, really. I've spoken to the Parliamentary Council many times, and quite frankly, it was then referred by them to Treasury. Now Treasury is saying you're taking it back to them. So there's no debate about it. Is there anybody disagreeing with this? Within 14 days, we want a reply from you as Treasury. Okay, you sort this out with the presidency. Is there any problem with that, please? This matter's been dragging on since, when is it, 2017? Any problems with that? No. Okay, Esther, Zakele, ensure it's a resolution that within 14 days, want them to reply, or we call Treasury before the committees, joint committees. We'll find a time, even if it's for an hour, okay, to settle this matter. DG, we are tired of this matter. It's not right. It's unconscionable, really. We are tired of raising it with the powers that be verbally. Our deputy minister gave a very good reply that actually made me think that maybe Mr. Rousseau, with due respect to Professor Rousseau, is not looking at the complexities. So, you know, it's very easy for him. He could do the reply for you. We asked you to contact him. And basically, this matter has to come to a halt now. It's 14 days, and that's it. Thank you. Is anybody opposing that? No. So that's a resolution, put it in the report. Right, let's move on to the stakeholders. Now we have to look at the second set of stakeholders who are here on Wednesday. They're a priority, and they should start in the order in which they spoke. Let me get there. There's Professor Rousseau, I think the first person happens to be. Let me look at the agenda here. I've got it. Yeah, that's the agenda for the third. Here's the first. So if I got it correct, you'll help me, it's Fiscal Cliff Study Group. Yes, then it's Institute of Taxation, Chartered Accountants, PwC, Public Economy, Sean and Benjamin. Go for it. We're going to give you a bit more time than the others, to be fair to you, because you lost out on Friday. So let's start with 4 minutes each, please. Okay. Right. Sorry. Yes, Willie?
Good morning, Chairperson. Chairperson, I would just like to find out, we as members of this committee have not had the chance to interact with the second portion.
Yeah, you can ask questions.
Will we be able?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. No, sure, but I mean, I just thought that we're going to interact with the members of public that presented to us before they reply. If I'm out of order, then we can wait for later.
No, it's sequencing. If we do that, you know what's going to happen. Some people are based in Cape Town, as you know. They have flight issues, right? They fly to OR Tambo and to Bombela and to Polokwane and to Sandusi and whatever. Okay, so to be fair, this is the only way we could manage it, and you will have your chance, really, so that we don't end up going around in circles. But no one's going to stop you from speaking. Moreover, you can also just phone me and tell me your questions. I'll put it together and send it to Treasury, and they'll have to reply before I report on Monday. Right, let's go for it. Professor Rousseau, please, can we move? Professor, you're on the ball there. Come, let's get in. I'm giving you 4 minutes now. We started.
Chairperson,
Right,
thank you. Chairperson, thank you very much. I trust everybody can see and hear me.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Chair, thank you very much for your intervention on the domestically manufactured vehicles. I really appreciate the approach you are following. I really appreciate the support. This matter has indeed been on the agenda for 5 or 6 years. So thank you very much for that support. I'm very glad we can bring this to a close in 14 days. Then secondly, I've not asked for the formulae, as you've rightly pointed out. I've asked for the calculations. So, Chair, can we please ask that Treasury make the actual calculations to get to the amount of about 79.8 billion rands and to 1.43 billion rands. Which numbers did they put in the formula? How did they do the calculations? How did they come up with the answers? Please ask Treasury to give it to the secretaries of these committees to distribute the actual numbers, the calculations to everybody in this session. We want to see how they get to the 1.3 billion and the 79.8 billion respectively. We can all read the formulae. We want to see the application. Please, if they can also do that and the secretaries can distribute that. If we then have questions, we will follow up. And then secondly, please publish the actual calculations in the future budget documentation in the budget review. South African taxpayers are entitled to see how these amounts are worked out that's being paid away. That is really what we are asking for. Then just my last point is a remark by Dr. Muller on Wednesday that the fiscal cliff is unscientific. Without going into any detail, I can just point out that the fiscal cliff calculation, the fiscal cliff barometer, and the fiscal cliff study group were the first to predict problems coming with civil service remuneration bill already by 2014. So this was the first early indicator that we're heading for trouble with civil service remuneration bill becoming too big, too much of a burden on the taxpayer. So Dr. Miller is entitled to think it's not scientific, but it was indeed a very important early indicator of where we were heading. But then in summary, please, if we can have the actual calculations as soon as possible, distributed to all these peoples in respect of CMA, seniorage sharing, and customs union, and get it published in future budget reviews at budget time and at TBPS, it would do wonders for transparency in South Africa. Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate the time.
You didn't use all your time. You still got a minute more, but fine. Let's move on to Institute of Taxation. Thank you. Here, Alan?
I'm here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Go ahead, please. You're starting right now.
Okay, let me be quick. I mean, let me just say that I largely support what Treasury is saying in terms of the budget overall. I mean, it'd be great to spend a lot of money on a lot of things, but we simply don't have that much money, and Treasury realizes that, and they're trying to be as fiscally prudent as possible. I would also say that, you know, just spending more doesn't mean that you're being more effective. I think we note that. The problem isn't government. We're very good in government in collecting money and allocating money, but then in actually utilizing it properly, we seem to have a problem, and that's what Treasury is saying. So the idea is being better bang for the buck rather than more bucks. So I fully support the Treasury in that view. I think the only issue that was mentioned on the tax, yes, I know the point about zero rating. Treasury and SARS hate zero rating the VAT. It has almost become a religious mantra. This has been around for 25 years. We seem to be willing to compromise the income tax, but not the VAT. Now, the thing about the income tax is if you have incentives for individuals on the income tax, you don't get cash up front. It's not cheaper to buy the thing. So if you're going to pay 100 or 200,000 Rand for a solar, and you're going to get maybe 10,000 back or whatever the amount is at the end of the year, you don't have the cash flow unless you're rich. Then you do have the cash flow. Second problem is once you're putting it on the income tax system, then you're jamming up the IT-12 individual returns, and then these things get audited. And so you start taking a risk. And then if you make a mistake, then you're subject to interest, you're subject to penalties. Now, the argument is, and it's always been on the VAT, that if you zero rate the VAT, the price will increase based on some study from somewhere. Now, in this case, we're talking about imports. I don't expect our import price to increase simply because of the VAT. I'd have to really see a specific study to prove that. It simply doesn't make economic sense. But having said all this, I know Treasury's position on zero rating. It is a request of mine. I knew it would be summarily denied, and I expected it to be so. So I don't take offense on that. Overall, budget is, I think Treasury and SARS are on the right track. They fully understand that we can't tax more from the compliant, and they're moving to expand the base for the people who are not paying tax unfairly, and I think that's correct. So again, we close that we're largely in support of Treasury and what it's doing. Thank you.
Oh, you got a minute and a half, right?
I have a minute and a half.
You can have it this time. No, thank you.
Yeah, let it go.
Chartered accountant.
Good morning, Chair and honourable members. Chair, I think we will hopefully not use up all our time. Let's try and... Chair, I think the concerns in going through the response from Treasury, I think that the main concern is the credibility of the budget as to is everything in there? And if everything is in there, are the estimates reasonable on the things made? And I think the commentators on Wednesday made the exact point as well, is that it should enable Parliament to be comfortable as the party or the forum approving the budget. And is it so that Parliament can be confident that everything is in here? So comments, for example, on the wage bill. Yes, there is a provision in, but is that a reasonable provision? Things like legal liabilities, pre-spending, other expenditure that usually is not captured or that we know is going to happen, are these things in fact in there? And I think that is the concern. As to tax to GDP and the ratio, I think the point that has been made in the last few years, Chair, is whether what Parliament has set as a target. So this doesn't matter whether the minister has set a target or not. Parliament has resolved that research should be conducted to actually understand whether a limit exists and whether what that limit is. The point is that has never been done. So it is relevant whether the minister has set or not set. Parliament has already resolved that certain action could flow quite a few decades ago, and that has not been done because we just don't know. And I think that's the point. Parliament should know whether it is relevant or not. It might conclude that it is not relevant, and then the matter is moot to that extent. We do commend Treasury, and we do agree on their statement that there seems to be little to no correlation between more allocation and service delivery. And I think that is an important statement, is that it cannot just be concluded that more money means more service delivery, or that less money means less service delivery. I think that is an important correlation, and we agree that currently there's just too many unknowns that prove that difference. Chair, and then to finish off on the last two items, we didn't see any comments on the statements made regarding water and water budgeting for infrastructure, and the fact that that's probably even worse than EFCOM coming, and it's been outstanding for more than a decade. The other, obviously, is the FATF. It is our reality. And the questions do pop up is, yes, we understood what was done last year in haste. Greylisting is now our reality. And to that extent,
hello, somebody in political help, somebody's intruding. Somebody's unmuted. Okay, go ahead, please. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Chair. Are the dates that we had set to try and avoid grey listing, are they reasonable given that the uncertainties by the relevant agencies currently and the processes they're still in, notwithstanding that 19 December was one implementation date, 1 April 2023, and neither civil society nor the relevant organs of state are in fact ready to implement this? And are we comfortable that doing this on this basis now, after we've been grey listed, is the right way? Should we not defer those dates and make sure that when we do this implementation, we do it right on both sides? Chair, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Oh, thank you. And next, you know your order, PwC, then it's PEP, and then Sean and Benjamin. Right, go for it, please. PwC.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Regarding the solar panels, our concern remains that the design of the incentive is still poorly targeted, and that it will still just benefit those who would have installed the panels in any event. And unfortunately, the reality remains that to access the maximum 15K incentive, the taxpayer will have to spend approximately 250,000 Rand. And this will mean that the incentive is not sufficient to include the middle income households or to induce the middle income households to invest in the panels. Regarding the diesel refunds, we understand National Treasury's logic to extend it to food manufacturers. However, we note that the rationale for diesel refunds in this case is very different from that of the refund for the primary producers. Secondly, we do understand that there are admin and compliance burdens and concerns, but that is, in our view, not a reason not to provide the relief. Also, we note that National Treasury has not commented on the reason to limit the relief to the road accident fund levy and not to also extend it to the general fuel levy. And then finally, on the diesel refunds, the fact remains, unfortunately, that business generally has to bear the burden of the diesel cost to mitigate the effect of load shedding by using the generators. So our concern is that the government should not, from a moral perspective, benefit from additional taxes collected from the increased consumption of diesel. And therefore, in our view, the tax revenue should be recycled back to business to mitigate the additional costs of load shedding. And then finally, we just note that there's no response on our comments on the adjustments for monetary amounts and our request that this should be explicitly addressed in the budget on an annual basis. And then there's also no response on the SALCO renegotiation and progress with that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Michael?
Morning, Chair and honourable members and colleagues. I think I would say that there is no single one right answer to how to do a budget or how to represent the various numbers in the budget. This is something that reasonable people can disagree about. And as we have seen today, our colleagues from Treasury are very reasonable. And I would say, you know, they present a professional, robust response to all of the criticisms, certainly all of the criticisms that I advanced. That is a model for how we should engage in public deliberation without labeling or accusing people of unnecessary problems. They've responded robustly and effectively, I think, to many of the issues raised in the hearings. But as I say, these are things about which reasonable people can disagree on, and our job in academia is to disagree on some of these things. So just to take the debate, because I'm sure we'll debate these issues going forward a little bit further, I would say that the key issue, I think, is whether the transfers of cash to Eskom should be reported as part of non-interest expenditure. Treasury has decided not to report them as part of non-interest expenditure. The consequence of that is that they do not form part of the main budget balance or the primary balance. So DG Momoniat is absolutely correct that all of the data and the information about what Treasury has done is in the budget documents and has been presented transparently and openly. So that's absolutely true. However, the decision to exclude the Eskom cash advances for the next 3 years from non-interest expenditure and from the primary balance, for me, is I disagree with that. And to explain why, I would say, you know, on slide 11 in Treasury's presentation, we're shown growth rates of non-interest expenditure in order to make the point that spending non-interest expenditure growth doesn't necessarily lead to economic growth. Good point. However, all of those growth rates include bailouts of state-owned companies, which have traditionally been included in non-interest expenditure in the past. And many of those high growth rates for single years that you can see in that graph are due to bailouts for Eskom. In the future, this budget has decided that they will no longer be reflected there. And that might be a right decision. It might be a wrong decision. Time will tell. The basis for the decision is that these cash flows will not fund operational spending. They will not fund aspects of the just transition. They will simply fund the pay down in Eskom's debt. In the universe that Treasury sees going ahead in the next few years, that makes absolute sense. However, when we look at the future, when we're outside of Treasury, maybe, we have to look at the future, imagine different possible outcomes and how the decisions that are being made today
will look from that point of view of the future. And since I have small children,
Michael, you have 30 seconds left, but we'll give you some
I've been
latitude because your
subjected
colleagues...
to watching things like Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. And I think when we look at our future scenarios, it's that multiverse of madness that may end up in any outcome that we have to be aware of and prepare for. So I look forward to discussing these issues more with the colleagues from Treasury. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that. I mean, these are things you can, as you say, continue discussing. Okay, next then would be, I think it's Sean Muller. Dr. Sean Muller. Is he not here in Kulileko?
Hi, Chair. Dr. Sean. Go ahead, Anna.
Okay. Sorry?
Sorry, Chair, he's unfortunately not available.
Good. Okay, not good, but I mean, fine. Let's move on then to the last one. It's Benjamin. Benjamin, can I raise something? Your issue is not with the executive, as I understand. It's with Parliament. Am I right? Benjamin? Dr. Cronin, is he not here either?
Hey, sorry, I apologize. Yes, no, I was correct.
Am I right to say your issues, as I understand them, are about Parliament, not the executive, right?
Correct. Yes, and for clarification, what I was submitting to both committees is to acknowledge that they are not bound as Parliament by the submissions made by National Treasury through the fiscal framework. I think an important point to clarify as well is that my submission's conclusion was precisely as you say, for Parliament in its own resolution when adopting the fiscal framework to, I think, clearly assert this. But there had a brief interruption to my participation in this, so I might have missed a National Treasury response, but I didn't clearly see one. So I'm not sure if it's an ominous omission or a silent statement of support of my position. I therefore don't have a further submission on what has already been proposed, but I just thought, since I have the committee's attention for 2 minutes, I know that the Eskom relief bill will obviously be subject to its own public participation, but I thought it would be important as part of the framework of understanding over the next 3 years what is anticipated, just signposting in section 22B of the draft bill. It envisages the minister having sole discretion to determine the basis on which what National Treasury has clarified are loans to Eskom would be converted to equity. I would just like to caution that, such broad sweeping discretionary powers granted to the executive without the, shall we say, the open clarity of publication, also run the risk of similarly being unlawful. But thank you, Chair. Thank you so much for the opportunity and other honourable members of the two committees to make my submission. It has been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think we will reply. Certainly, I have replied to the issues you raised at the end, but I don't want to do it now. If you can stay, I will reply in the next on the next item. Basically, can I please plead with somebody who's unmuted when they should be muted to ensure they are unmuted? Okay, next then is the stakeholders in the first half. Now, because we have some time, maybe we can give you, well, let's target 2 minutes really, because you had an opportunity on Wednesday. And so, 2 minutes, but if you have to, maximum 3 minutes, please. And then we throw it open to members to pose questions to the presenters that came in the second half and take it further. Okay, over then to the first half presenters. Kosatu first. Was that Matthew? You here, right? Matthew? Is Matthew
Chair, sorry.
Yeah.
No, I'm here, Chair.
Yeah, good.
Sorry, I just had some gremlins with my gadgets. I'm getting a little bit middle-aged. No, thanks, Chair. Yeah, just very quickly. Look, I think just to the quick points, because of time constraints, I think we do understand and we do agree with government. We do need to manage the issue of the debt trajectory. The growth in it is worrying to us, but we think we need to couple it with also investing in growing the economy, because simply just take the debt reduction at all costs approach, we think is going to be dangerous. And we do think we need to address the fundamental obstacles to growing the economy. So the issue of load shedding, the issue of cable theft, of the railway network, of infrastructure, etc. So we think the issue of the wage bill has become a bit of a political scapegoat at times, because the wage bill has been stable at 35% of the budget since 2008. It was increased that time because we employed additional skilled public servants. What's changed is that the explosion of corruption, of load shedding, of cable theft, etc. But look, I think we want to say to government, engage with unions at the PSCBC in good faith. Let's see how we find a win-win solution. But Chair, if we simply say we're going to impose wage freezes upon public servants or giving below inflation increases and they're drowning in debt, what you're going to see is an expedited brain drain of nurses, of teachers, of doctors to the private sector, to overseas, to better paying jobs. So we think there is a need for a single collective bargaining framework for the entire state and to see which vacancies should be prioritized. But we can say that if you look at SARS and the good work SARS has done, it's testimony to the value of investing in quality public services. And we really want to appreciate the work that SARS employees have done. They've really saved this budget to a large extent, and last year too. And we want to say, let's give SARS additional resources to help further crack down on tax and customs evasion, because that's going to give huge space to the fiscus. Chair, on the relief front, look, we think on the fuel relief, there was some positive relief, but we need to address the road accident fund issues, and that includes getting those two bills, the RAF and RAPS bills, to Parliament. We're quite disappointed that the presidential promise stimulus was cut from 24 billion rand to 9 billion rand. And instead of taking up, ideally 2 million participants, is now being shrunk to 250,000 participants. Yet we have a huge level of unemployment for young people. The SOD grant, is positive, has been extended and needs to go beyond that. But again, Chair, it doesn't make sense when a budget projects for a 4.5% increase for members of Parliament's salaries. But when it comes to the SRD grant, we're saying a 0% increase, and there's been no increase for the SRD, the 350 since 2020. Chair, we do want to appreciate the positive engagement we had with Treasury on the early access to pension funds for workers, and we're quite pleased with the progress we'll see on the bill front, and we think we can get that through Parliament this year, and that's going to give significant relief to workers. Then just lastly, Chair, on the SOE, we want to support the Eskom debt relief package, but we don't think it should be coming with conditions about selling Eskom assets. We should rather be saying to Eskom, to translate to PRASA, how can the state give you more support in terms of corruption, in terms of security issues, criminality, etc.
Please round up, yeah, please.
Okay, cool. So I think the other issues, Chair, we have mentioned before on the post office and Denel. And I think the other issues around the local government, the lack of plans there, we can raise it on the DORA bill. And I think we can raise appropriations issues around in the appropriations bill. So let me conclude there, Chair. I know I've exceeded my time limits. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Hila.
I will go, Chair. Thank you so much. And I'll be brief. I think we hear what overall is being said about the moratorium on health promotion leave, but making decisions as huge as those, there must be, evidence that can substantiate. And I think taking other stakeholders in confidence, because the big concern is you will have other industries, you will have tobacco, you will have alcohol, all coming to make claims about, how they are impacted by the economy or other external factors. So I think it's important that Treasury take into confidence other stakeholders in terms of that decision making. And we believe that we are going to continue having engagement, because otherwise you face being challenged without providing confidence, evidence, and for such huge decisions. I think the last thing, I think as a talking point from my end, is in the 2 or 3 budget, and you can check, Chair, even on the notes, Treasury has been talking about the public consultations on expansion of the tax. This easily becomes a rhetoric if doesn't have time frame. Another budget speech will come, and then we will be, or soon we will embark on public consultation. So is there a commitment as to, or time frame, at least a clear time frame in terms of when will this commence? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Amanda Moby.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. The responses by Treasury are well received, and we will scrutinize the presentation as a whole so we can have a constructive response in writing. Honorable Chair, we while we do acknowledge the responses and reasoning by Treasury why taxes on the rich cannot be increased and so forth, we do have a request that Treasury provides any research and evidence in writing that shows, the rationale, that shows reasoning why taxing the rich more would not have a positive impact towards increasing more money to use for social spending and so forth. So any evidence or research in writing that they can provide, we do request that they do so. Thank you, Honorable Chair.
Is that on the wealth tax, right?
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Yeah, fine. No, I'm sure they'll be able to do that. And anyway, we will decide whether they do that or not as Parliament. Right, next is Institute for Economic Justice. IAJ, are you here?
Excellent. Thanks very much, Chair. It is Gilad Isaacs, the ED of IAJ, and very nice to be in Parliament with you. Three broad sets of issues. The first is on a broad framing. Treasury makes an input on slide 4 that macroeconomic policy is not about growth. It's about creating a enabling environment within which micro policy must spur employment and growth. This is Treasury's broad framework and is fundamentally flawed. Macroeconomics as a field and as a policy was fundamentally devised to be about full employment and growth. And we cannot abscond and reduce the role of fiscal policy as simply creating this enabling environment. Treasury also can't have it both ways, arguing as the minister did in a defensive manner that this is not austerity, and then arguing here that yes, in fact, there are budget cuts because they aren't following a incrementalist logic where there are inflation-based increases. So let's call this what it is. It's an austerity budget which involves budget cuts. In that case, let's see the impact assessment which National Treasury should be obligated to undertake to show what the impact of these budget cuts will actually be. And they list some minor instances here of improvements, rationalizations, and so on. But these are really marginal to the real scope of the fall in budgets, which we'll see. You cannot put up a graph which shows increased debt and low growth. This is a correlation and causation aren't the same thing. And it's frankly embarrassing that Treasury thinks that a graph like that can be used to argue that increased spending won't lead to increased growth. You also cannot talk about tax increases in isolation from what that money is spent on. Sure, if there's tax increases and that money it disappears or is spent poorly, it can have a negative growth impact. But
round up, please, yeah.
Okay. On the issue of social grants, they claim that this is not about policy, right? But in fact, it is. By not providing for the SRD in the outer years, it essentially is a decision to remove that grant, one which will be challenged. They also pose social grants as being in opposition to other employment creation. Yet what we've seen is conclusive evidence locally and internationally that these social grants have a significant impact, including on
you can take your submissions in writing. Yeah, you're close to 4 minutes. Yeah.
Okay. I will
end quickly in 20 seconds. Yeah.
Okay.
Go
On the other hand, they endorse a scheme, the ETI, which they note has no conclusive evidence. Lastly, it is dangerous to provide Treasury that has no expertise in energy policy with a veto over ESCOM policy, and that should be opposed. Thanks very much for your allowance.
BJC, thank you. BJC, and then
Thank
PBO.
you. Thank you very much, Chair. If I may, I'm just going to ask two very quick questions and then hand over to my colleagues, Gillard Isaacs and Russell Rensburg. So firstly, Chair, we just wanted to find out on the GRB process, if perhaps there are any timelines already available regarding this process and what public participation is being envisaged for this process so that we can shape and be a part of this. And then secondly, on the FOA process, our concern as the BJC remains in particular around the fact that we are worried that this process may remain at a pre-budget consultation phase. And so we just wanted more clarity around that, particularly from this year onwards, around how we as the public can actually engage with National Treasury and government departments. I will now hand over to Gillard Isaacs and to Russell Rensburg, but just to also note and reiterate Amanda.Mobi's request, and then also just concur with IEJ's sentiments on the SRD grant as well. Thank you.
Please come in. Your colleague seems not to be connected. Your third colleague?
Yes.
Russell, if you can go ahead, I have made my input. Thanks, Russell.
Okay, no problem. Thank you, Gillard. Thank you. Good morning, Chair, and it's a privilege to be speaking to the committee again. I think for us, in these difficult times, we've just come out of a massive crisis, and responding to that crisis, it seems that we're just reverting to old policies, and we're not really thinking about the lessons. And I think for us, we started off with this notion of what does the Constitution enjoin us to do? And I think we all aspire to creating a better life for all and not for some. And sadly, this budget doesn't consider the needs of the 80% of the population, and we're particularly concerned by some of the issues that Treasury raises in their budget making. I think they're quick to say that budgets don't address structural inefficiencies. Then at the same time go out and try and, like Gillard puts it, address conditionalities that they can't manage on probably the biggest crisis we're facing around electricity supply. So it does beg the question, the extent to which the measures that they're allowing for ESCOM's recovery will be effective. But I think what's even more worrying is this notion of that Edgar brought forward, that they're much more willing to fund better performing departments and punish ones that don't perform, but then provide no insights into what capacity building is taking place to improve the effectiveness of underperforming departments. And paradoxically, it could lead to a further regression of socioeconomic rights. Secondly, there are no clear, transparent measures to say how Treasury makes these assessments to determine who.
Right? So can you please round up? Yeah, sorry about this, because it's not fair to others. Yeah, quickly, please.
Right, so I think the main question that we have to ask from Parliament is what political accountability will you hold Treasury to? Is this a fait accompli? Given that Parliament's responsibility is to ensure that all these legislative approaches are in line with our constitutional mandates and that we do progressively work towards expanding the quality of life of everyone. And I think this budget doesn't do that. In fact, it favors the rich and perpetuates a different kind of apartheid. And I think it will be morally disproportionate for Parliament not to respond to this budget in the manner that it should. So I think more should be done. And I think we can't just accept everything that Treasury says to us. And I think there needs to be deeper interrogation. Thank you for the opportunity. Over.
Thank you. PBO, please just stick to your time, PBO. You're an internal structure and you can always write to us. So please, take the time. Yeah.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. I'll try and be quick. Just to reiterate the words that the acting DG used when he was responding during the MTBPS to PDO's comments, I'd like to say the PBO is not convinced by the strategy of the National Treasury, nor its economic analysis, nor its discussion about incrementalism, nor its, as Gillard was saying, its pitiful graph on growth and increased spending. But what we realize, which I hope National Treasury and the acting DG realizes, that it's not up to us to say we're not convinced. This is for, and we'll stay in our lane and we'll say this is for the members of the committees and the National Parliament to decide. And I hope that the Treasury doesn't make those kind of comments about the PBO and the PBO views that we couldn't afford to support and advise the committees on in the future. To say that, I think the point that, you know, what you can and can't do with macroeconomic policy is a really important one, and it's an ideological one that comes out of a specific, fairly retrogressive perspective on macroeconomic policy. I think what South Africa needs is a developmental macroeconomic policy that realizes that when you support and provide basic services and help to poor and struggling households, and in South Africa that would be more than the bottom 50% of households, you actually are developing the possibility for growth, positive growth, not just reforming an economy that is dysfunctional and allowing future dysfunctional growth where you have the economy being a machine for inequality, but actually having an inclusive growth where households can actually spur aggregate demand and develop the kind of demand that drives investment and employment and shapes a new growth path for the South African economy that the desperately requires, away from the current dysfunctional one that needs serious structural transformation. In terms of the point on social assistance levels, I think it's really important that we recognize that South Africa is a major outlier. Our unemployment rates, our inequality levels are usually off the chart different to the countries in those graphs that were put up, and basically to the world, even some of the poorest countries in the world. And so to put up a graph like that is also, I think, fairly misleading, if not disingenuous. I want to accuse my colleagues in National Treasury of being disingenuous, but I think it's really important that they
You're at 3
looking...
minutes, Raj, please. Yeah, can you round up?
Okay, thanks. I would like my colleague Shepo or Sipatilla to come in and to talk about incrementalism and understanding.
No, it won't be fair, really. You're an internal structure.
Okay, then we'll respond in
writing.
writing.
Let me just hear the stakeholders. Yeah, can we hear the stakeholders? We'll come back at this time. So can we start with Willie? How come, Willie? You wanted to speak. Now, what we're going to do with 10:50, and that's a program 10:50. I'm sorry about this. I hate being a policeman type. This is not what I really want to do. But we don't have a choice because it doesn't affect me, but people are going to start drifting out at 12:00. And in any case, as PBO, you have plenty of exchange. You have plenty of opportunity. You don't qualify as a civil society stakeholder, please, Saraj and so on. Now, here we are. We are where we are. We're on time, more or less. Now, the issue is, Willie, you wanted to come in first. Now, colleagues, let's be fair. The first half presenters were put questions to, and they've had more than enough time to reply. So let's focus now on the second half presenters, put questions to them, and at the same time, colleagues, can we please respond to what Treasury has said today and all the stakeholders have said today. So starting with you, Willie, you had some questions for Wednesday that you couldn't put. And others, I'm sure, are in the same boat. So we'll start with you, Willie. Can you put your hands up, please? The team will help.
Thank you, Chairperson. Yeah, Chairperson, thank you for the opportunity. I think I'm going to ask questions in general where there are questions that need to be put to one of the stakeholders specifically. I'll do so. Firstly,
but before you start, let's be fair to all the members. I see only 2 hands up. So 4 minutes, 3 hands up. Stay 4 minutes is fine. Is that okay? Please, the members must decide. But then I'm prepared to stay till beyond 12. So if the majority want to stay beyond 12 and the stakeholders and Treasury can, I'm fine with that. But is 4 minutes reasonable, members, for each member to speak? Because remember, they have to reply if they have opportunities to. So 4 minutes, people are seeming to agree. Okay, up to 4 minutes. You don't have to have 4 minutes, obviously. I'll also take not more than 4 minutes. In fact, I'll take less than 4 minutes. Go for it.
Thank you, Chairperson. Yeah, Chairperson, general comments. I agree that we should have a zero-rated VAT on certain items. We've said that in many instances in the past. Treasury came back today and said that it is the retailer who scores when that happens and not the end user. I would like to find out from Treasury as well as members of the panel whether they've got specific evidence that proves that. I think that for Treasury to say something like that, it just means that, well, government will still score because we're not going to give it, whether it's to the end user or to the retailer. I still believe that the zero rate rating of certain items on VAT will benefit the end user a lot. So if we can get some clarity on evidence for what the National Treasury said or the lack thereof. Chairperson, then in general, I would like to find out from our stakeholders the issue with regards to the war in Ukraine at the moment. As South Africa, we are supposedly standing neutral. Now, we have in the past month did military exercises with Russia. Our Minister Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma met with them. We have had meetings with the ambassadors in South Africa. Yet, we are standing neutral, but up to now, the request from the ambassador of Ukraine to have a meeting with our president, which request was done more than a year ago, have not been agreed to. So on the one hand, we are saying we're standing neutral. On the other hand, we are doing a lot of things with Russia. We meet with them, we do military exercises with them, but we don't even speak to their ambassador in our country. I think it says a lot of our supposed neutrality. My question is, what would the long-term effects be should Europe and the European Union and the United States implement sanctions or tighten the screws on imports and exports from South Africa? What will the effect of that be on our economy? And I am of the opinion, and the minister also said, that it was not taken into consideration when this budget was drafted. I think it's a serious problem for us. Our trade with the European Union and with America is far higher than our trade with Russia. And I think we are putting that at risk. And I would like to get the input from members there, from stakeholders there. Chairperson, Saika said that we will have a water crisis. I'm not going to expand a lot on that. I agree with that. And that needs to be looked at. We have got to look at what is spent on infrastructure. And we know that we battle to spend 1% on the maintenance of our infrastructure, whereas we are supposed to spend 8%. And the SAIT said that we don't have a tax problem, we've got an expenditure problem. And I think that the problem is that we are spending at the wrong points. We need to spend where it's required to positively have an influence on our economy. And if you look at what happened with Eskom and with a lot of other state-owned enterprises, it's because money was spent incorrectly, especially on maintenance. If you look at municipalities, if you look at Eskom, there was not maintenance spending, and that will lead to further problems with that. Chairperson, with the fuel levy and PwC, we agree with you on that. I would like to come to Eskom specifically, and Mr. Sachs of the Public Economic Project touched on this. He said that Eskom is likely to stay dependent on cash injections from government. Now, that is cash that we do not have, and we know that in future we will have even less cash due to our debt service cost and everything that just goes up. What is the real solution? What you guys think should happen with Eskom to make it less dependent on cash injections in the future? We cannot go on like this. We cannot give bailout and take over debt and just carry on, but nothing gets implemented on ground level to change that. So I would like to find out what their issues are there. Then with regards to Saika, also this morning raised the issue of the wage bill. I've asked the minister the other day with regards to the wage bill, what have been taken into consideration for this budget. He said that he was a trade unionist himself, and he knows that people or trade unions always come in with a high amount that they aim for, but they will get lower. the point is we haven't received an answer on what the specific percentage of increase is that they have worked on in this budget. And in the past, we saw that they didn't work in any increases because they said that there wouldn't be, and then there were increases, and budget had to be adjusted for that. So I think it's very important to get a proper amount of what the increase would be. Otherwise, how can we do this budget? Thank you, Chairperson. That was a mouthful. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, unusually. Okay, fine. Let's go for it. Who's next? You know who you are. It's Fane, Simon Maletsane, and Dennis.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. I'll be brief. Only 2 points. Firstly, with regards to the GEPF that's investing and have been investing a lot of the funds of the pension fund in Eskom. Just an opinion from National Treasury, would you say that since Eskom is definitely in a downward spiral and is relying on state bailouts all the time, and load shedding is escalating, all of that, taking into consideration that the GEPF might be looking at losing a large percentage of their investment? Just your opinion on that. And then, Chair, if the following point can maybe be included in the committee report recommendations, since National Treasury opened their presentation this morning and stated that they are in support of transparency and they want to be transparent as far as possible and always, that the committee include that National Treasury publish the calculations and figures of the CMA and SACU in each budget review, and agree to supply that or provide us with that as soon as possible. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Next, please, Simon Maletsane.
Thank you, Chairperson. Mine is more of a comment than a question. I just want to appreciate what the committee did for the widow's voice, for going an extra mile just to allow them to be able to do their presentation so that they can be heard. I just want to say thank you very much for that. Thank you, Chairperson.
Do you have a mandate from the EFF to say that, my friend? Okay, teasing you. I can't resist. Okay, fine. Let's go to Dennis. Dennis.
It would have been so much more meaningful if he'd have joined us yesterday, Chair. But no, that's fair enough. Thank you. Yeah, thanks very much. And yeah, there's an unusual order today. I'm not sure if we're opening up a can of worms by having this discussion now, and then opening the door for people to come in and have their say over and over again. But having said that, I do want to appreciate the presentations, and I want to associate myself with the comments of Dr. Michael Katz, or Professor. I'm not sure which he is this at the moment, but yeah, I strongly agree with what he said. There's been robust discussions, and I've actually quite enjoyed the inputs which have been, you know, some from the left, some from the center, others would argue some from the right, but different people. And I mean, we've had a strange juxtaposition of different people arguing from totally different points of view and making opposite suggestions. And I think that as each has made their point, it's been quite useful for us to as members of parliament to establish the mood of the country. And so I want to welcome all of the presentations and just say again, I really think that it's great that we have this level of interaction. And the fact is, if you don't win your battle immediately, you know, take a leaf from the widows and keep batting, you know, keep coming back until you're satisfied. Having said that, Chair, I do think it would have helped us if SARS had been in the meeting yesterday. I understand it was called at the drop of a hat, but I do think it would have helped us to get more close to the truth if we'd have had both arguments put forward and both perspectives put forward yesterday. I think it's been narrated. I'm not going to labor on that. Chair, just on some of the issues that we haven't had an opportunity to interrogate, I do want to say, you know, the fiscal cliff was quite right. At the moment, our biggest export is taxpayers, and I think it is something that needs to be we need to be very aware of. You know, the people that are keeping the country afloat are kind of wandering off, and that's not constructive in the long term. The South African Institute of Taxation made a very strong argument for tax fairness, which I associate myself with very closely, and was part of my motivation for being keen to hear yesterday's issues from the widows. So tax fairness is key, not only with the widows, but generally across the board. But the Institute of Taxation made a strong second half of the argument where they spoke about simplification. And if only we could find a way that SARS could make it a lot simpler for ordinary Joe public to understand their tax affairs and be able to get it through. I think that would go a long way towards helping people remain compliant. People that try to be compliant and then through the complexity are just left out of the cold and then throw their hands up in dismay and don't know where to go. And actually end up having to spend money on expensive consultants and advisors, which is probably unnecessary, although SAICA might disagree with that. But yeah, and then that's a good segue into SAICA's inputs. And I do want to say, so Billy picked up on this a little bit, but the water disaster, the water crisis, and the sanitation crisis that we're dealing with is strongly associated with the inability to get ourselves up and running with serious, good infrastructure spent. And whether it's at municipal level or at the provincial and national levels, we are just not making it. And I think that the president alluded to it again in his speech, talking about setting up an infrastructure advisory commission again of some sort, which I took as a vote of no confidence in public works. People took exception to that, but I do think that the infrastructure-led recovery that we were promised in the ERRP has not materialized. And in fact, we've got so much catch-up that needs to happen right now that that we can't expect there to be an infrastructure-led recovery, because we've just got, I mean, we can't recover, we've just got to get back to where we were before we can start doing a proper recovery. So there's a huge backlog that needs to be filled. SAICA also spoke about grey listing and where that started. Well, you know, I mean, my opinion on that is that it started with the disbandment of the Scorpions, and we've just gone downhill from there. And I mean, we've seen the matter that the majority of the items left on the agenda relate to the inability to get justice served on many people. And there's just, I mean, there's no consequences, not consequence management, there's just no consequences for people. We mustn't manage the consequences, we must put them in prison. And that's not happening. So our investigative capabilities have been eroded. And of course, our prosecutorial abilities as well. And that needs to be a strong focus in order to get us out of the grey listing. My last point, Chair, relates to SAICA talking about councillors' accountability. Now, I want to point to and their comment was made in haste and almost glossed over, but holding councillors to account. And I think this is a big issue, specifically with the water disaster, water crisis, the sanitation crisis. Holding councillors to account is actually quite difficult for us as Parliament because of specifically the Chapter 3 of the Constitution and paragraph 151.3 of the Constitution. So you know, they are a separate arm of government. They don't report to us, and there are very few mechanisms that we have to hold them to account. But I do think that our Appropriations Committee needs to take a much stronger stance in terms of finding municipalities that are not spending the money that's given to them, not spending it appropriately, not getting value for money when it's being spent, or not bothering to spend it. And we need to start bringing those municipalities in to give account to the Appropriations Committee. And the same for provinces. If they're not spending the money that's given to them and not spending it on what we want them to be spending it, we as the Appropriations Committee, those of us that sit on it, need to start calling them in and holding them accountable. So, but yeah, I'd be very keen to hear from SAICA what other accountability mechanisms they would suggest and they'd want us to take. Thank you very much, Chair, for the opportunity.
Thanks, Liz. Is there anybody else? I don't see any other hands up. Do you, the staff?
No hand.
Okay. Yeah. Is there anybody who wants to put more specific questions to those who presented in the second half of Wednesday? Is there any other hand up? The group starting with Fiscal Cliff? No. Okay. You can time me, including civil society. I know some of you were cheesed off with me. Hey, look, whether you want to believe this or not, I don't like doing this thing, and I'm very glad I won't be doing it for long. Okay, so I'm starting. Can you monitor me in Koleko, right? So this is separate, obviously, from some issues of summary I have to do on behalf of the whole committee. I think we should reply to Benjamin Cronin. He, amongst others, is basically saying that we're not doing our job. And you know what, colleagues, comrades, friends, on the committee's side, people have a right to say that. This is their parliament, as I keep saying, we're just custodians for 5 years. They decide who comes here. So, well, through the political party list system, of course. But basically, that's fine. It's a credible argument. We ourselves are critical of our own failure at times. So, Benjamin, I don't know what it is that you're saying that we don't agree with. We know that the fiscal framework is not binding. The projections are inaccurate. We've been raising that, as you might or might not have seen, repeatedly. And they've given us explanations for why that is off-key. Treasury has for several years now. It's clear it's not good. It's not binding. It's a fiscal framework. It's not a bill. And it doesn't fit a discussion, and we'll see today and as we go into the appropriations. But it does provide the framework. You can't do the appropriations and division of revenue without a framework. Now, your recommendations are, we can't make changes because of assumptions. Yeah, we're aware of that. That we can't say that because of the assumptions in the fiscal framework, we have to stick by it and we can't make changes. I don't think we ever have said that. So your recommendation basically is that we mention in reports, effectively it's reports, Benjamin, the resolution, a vote in each house. In that sense, there's a resolution, but the report is adopted is the way we speak. That's the language we speak. It's neither here nor there, but it's not binding. You say, well, we know that. Nothing is binding on Parliament, as you know. It doesn't have the status of law. We've never said it does. Committed to constitutional obligations, commit ourselves. We have to, in other words, Benjamin, we can't, if we do it here, that means on every report we submit to Parliament, every bill, every report on that bill, we have to say Parliament commits to fulfilling its constitutional obligations and carrying out effect. Now, here today are these four organizations from civil society who basically even say we're unconstitutional and we don't do our jobs and so on. That is their right. And ultimately, they have the power to vote for who they want, a better set of MPs than the current ones. But what I'm saying, Benjamin, is that basically what you seem to be saying is that we actually are not performing. That's fine. But what you're proposing here, I don't know. I'm just throwing it open. You can come back. It's your turn in a moment. And others have been put questions too. But MPs can also add, because it's about us as Parliament and whether we need to do those things. Okay, but it's something we can do ongoing as well. Okay, I'm done. Now, can we hand over then to the second half stakeholders, any of those to whom questions were put before we come back to Treasury and the stakeholders who spoke today on the issues they spoke about today? Okay, fine. Is there anybody from the, is there some way you can communicate? Yes, you can. So let's start with the second half. Is there anybody whom questions were put to or comments were made on that they want to respond to, like on the water crisis? So I see Saika. Yes, go ahead, Peter.
And Prof. also as well, Chair.
Yeah, but 2 minutes each, please. Unless you have to go beyond that.
Hopefully not, Chair, so we'll try and keep it concise. As to Honourable Oakam's question, obviously on the war in Ukraine, any sanctions have a negative impact. How government decides we will not support and for what reasons, I think that is a political discussion. But do sanctions have an impact? Of course they do. On the water crisis, I think what we are seeking is firstly an acknowledgement that this problem is as big as we see it to be. Because I think that's the concern, is not getting the recognition. And then secondly, if we agree it is as big as it is, where's the quantification that impacts the budget? Because without the quantification, I think we're starting to miss the scale of what needs to be done and how the budget addresses that problem. On the wage bill, the question is not necessarily whether there is, it's whether it's a reasonable estimate. And in our detailed submission, I think we are of the view that one of the problems in getting to is the fact that the budget for the wage bill is done retrospectively rather than prospectively, which makes it very difficult for Treasury to get a number in the year that it's already in. But I don't think it's also fair on workers that they have to wait in the current year to get a retrospective increase and don't have that certainty going forward. And the budget should be forward-looking. It shouldn't be dealing with matters on a historical basis. And I think that is on that. On to Honourable Ryder's questions about water crisis, once again, it's about the fact that this will create a social and financial instability. It will have an impact on debt, and it will have an impact on revenue if what's happening in KwaZulu-Natal on the sanitation side is anything to go by. You can't run a butchery and hospital, etc., without water. You can still accommodate no electricity. You can't run any of those businesses without water. On the grey listing, I think our submission is about currently the practical matter of implementation. So we all agree what needs to be implemented. And yes, the Minister of Justice and the Minister of Police probably have the biggest task, and they probably have to explain how they're going to do those. But currently we have a lot of things that need to be done by both government and civil society. And I think the question is, we understand what and why Treasury did what it did last year, but we're now past trying to save the matter. It's now about making sure we work towards 2025 in a proper and holistic manner in that. Holding councillors responsible, I think, was his last question on that. What can Parliament do more? Well, large question is about Treasury control. We've made detailed submissions about this in the last 2 years. The budget, and yes, some of it is done in appropriation, but also the impact of the implosion of local government, which we've quite clearly seen. It comes out of the Auditor General's report, out of Treasury's own reports. Are we actually properly factoring in that impact on the economy in both our debt? So who's going to take over this debt when it happens? And Treasury control on in real time. Why is that not happening? The Constitution already provides for what needs to happen in those circumstances. Then why is it not happening in the current circumstances? Lastly, even though not directly, I think we raised a similar question as to Honourable Karim on is Parliament doing its job? And I think the question is the budget being subjected to the criteria as set out, and I think in 214(2) of the Constitution. So it lists all the things Parliament must be confident that the budget meets, and it ticks all those boxes. And if Parliament concludes that it ticks all those boxes, well, then it should be confident that it can pass the budget. But the question is, do we expressly, or is the parliamentarians actually expressly looking at all those criteria, and are they actually confident that all those criteria have been met? I think that is rather the question is, have we ticked the boxes? Chair, that's our response, and hopefully we've covered all the matters.
Any other people who respond to the second half questions put to you? I know Benjamin might want to respond. Anybody else?
Yes, please, Chair.
Yeah, well, if there were issues raised with you, okay, fine, go ahead. Right, go ahead, please. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair. Honourable Ryder made a very important point that we must please focus on, namely, we are exporting taxpayers from South Africa because we are overtaxing them. There's a limit to which we can tax people. And then the Honourable De Tooy put a very firm proposal that must please be supported by these committees, namely for the CMA and the SACU payment calculations, all the detail to be published in future budget reviews. And I plead with this committee, with these committees, to firmly support that recommendation. And I want to go a step further, please, Chair. For the current budget year, from the 1st of April 2023 to the 31st of March 2024, where the CMA payments come to 1.4 billion rands, the SACU payments come to 79.8 billion rands. Treasury must have made those calculations to come up with the answers. Can I plead with the committee to ask Treasury to give us today, if then by close of business today, to the Secretariat for distribution to all the people in this session, the actual calculations as we've asked, because they must have made the calculations to come up with the answers. So it can't be a big
but
job.
I mean, with due respect, Professor, so we've discussed this issue. You're flogging they said they were making available, and we said fine. In any case, we are accountable to Parliament. So what's the issue now? Is there something
Can we ask Treasury for this fiscal year to give us the actual calculations, Chair? And then lastly, the Fiscal Cliff Study Group also asked what the impact of the grey listing will be on the CMA in SACU countries, if any. And we've not heard Treasury responding to that question. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you. Okay, who's next? Now, from what I can gather, is anybody else who wants to speak? From the second half presenters of the other day? No. Okay, Benjamin, do you want to reply at all?
Hey, yes, thank you. So just two quick statements. I'm very cognizant of time. The first is to say, no, I think we are actually very largely in agreement. And to clarify that in the field of legal academia, there is some uncertainty as to the framing of the Procedure Act and whether Parliament had envisaged to try and bind itself or not. And I'm immensely happy and relieved that we are of the same mind. And I completely concur with much of what you had said. The second aspect, as to whether Parliament is fulfilling its obligations in totality, I think that is a much broader conversation, but the open-ended question I would leave with honourable members is that it's not immediately clear, in the absence of amendments to appropriations, or indeed an articulation around the process of amendments, any clarification from Parliament about meeting those needs. And I use basic education as an example. It's not immediately clear in the final appropriation that Parliament itself, separate from the executive or the administration, has considered whether it is supporting and meeting in a particular financial year the absolutely immediately realizable right to basic education. And the second point is a procedural point. It's about future financial commitments of government as a whole. I note it was very innovative of National Treasury to make the ESCOM bill a direct charge. I think that's the only way of guaranteeing future financial commitments. But I think Parliament is unfortunately exposed where there is a slight gap in our law, and it was exposed in the salary increment negotiations. And my submissions are merely to warn members of Parliament that I think these issues will reoccur and that Parliament needs to apply its mind when appropriations are presented to it and consider whether it needs to amend them. But as I say, I'm very happy and in agreement with broadly what you were saying in your response, that Parliament is not bound by the fiscal framework and has a free hand to amend and in fact increase appropriations. But thank you very much for the opportunity to respond.
Okay, let's hand over then to Treasury, and we'll come back to civil society stakeholders as well if there's space. We've got, 40 minutes left. Okay, Treasury, can you take up about 15 minutes in responding, and let's see how things go. We can come back to different sectors depending on the time available. Right, over to you, Treasury, please.
No, thank you, Chair, and thank you for all the questions and so on. As I said earlier, we welcome robust questions, especially those that are critical. Because it gets us thinking, and it's good to be forced to think and to respond. Chair, I think, and let me just start with Ben Cronin's input. I know we're giving it a lot of air, but it takes me back to 1994 to 97 when we had the new constitution and we had to interpret what it means. How do you incorporate provinces? How do you incorporate Section 214 of the Constitution? What do you legislate? How do you deal with forward commitments? Why is interest a first charge, etc., etc.? So I would welcome Ben to come and meet with me I would like to hear his perspective. I think he also once said that exchange control measures are unconstitutional. We've never lost a constitutional court case, even though I might share some of his reservations. I think those are important questions, good to look at how the budget complies. But like you've pointed out, Chair, it's Parliament that ultimately passes every law, approves the budget, and it has the power. And I think we're very conscious of that power. I think even on issues like role of the minister in dealing with conditions for ESCOM, etc., a lot of that is under the oversight and in terms of the laws. And of course, some laws, like appropriation and the tax laws, in a sense, there's an element of them being enacted after the financial year has started. So we've got to also cater for those types of situations. With regard to, I want to remark more broadly. I think, Chair, something that perhaps we must bring out more strongly is, there is no doubt that value for money is, for me, the biggest issue that we need to face, particularly corruption. I think the Zondo Commission has done its reports. The President has committed government in October last year to implementing many of the recommendations from Judge Zondo. And I think it's going to be very critical that we do so, because corruption has become entrenched, particularly in our procurement system. And let me say, having been at the Treasury and having been responsible for the PFMA and MFMA, and to see how our procurement system has been abused, I do think as Treasury, we should take the criticism that we didn't do enough to keep the thieves at bay, okay? For people who knew how to get around the procurement system. We were, I think, too naive. And I think part of our project is to modernize the procurement system and to go beyond the bill, because I think it's so entrenched that when one of the honorable members referred to, for example, on water, yes, water and many infrastructure is subject to looting, and it's not stopped, and it's something that we have to continually be on guard against. In fact, every department or institution needs to put corruption first, make sure its audit committee checks that it's the highest risk factor, and get the internal controls in place. And even with the Auditor General, they need to focus, in my view, on corrupt and suspicious spending. And we need to review the whole approach to irregular expenditure, because I think it's taking us away from the real thieves who are stealing, and we need to stop them because they are sabotaging the country. To get to that, Chair, we need to focus on good governance, because the issue is, how do you get good governance when you appoint, whether you appoint your Director General, whether you appoint boards, all of those, I think, are critical to look at. And that's, I think, the essence of both the Zondo and the Nugent Commission's proposals, is you need to depoliticize those processes, get a professional public service, and make everyone realize that they are not above the Constitution. If your minister wants you to do something untoward, we need stronger mechanisms for an accounting officers to say no and not lose their jobs. And unless and until we do that, we are not going to deal with corruption. So, and we have to deal with corruption and more accountability on spending, so that we also then get better tax compliance. Tax morality is a problem. And when people feel that potholes aren't being fixed up, that money is being stolen, they are less prone to pay their taxes. And as the Prof. Yanni Rousseau says, people then, we are exporting taxpayers. So we've got to kind of build a nation, we've got to deal with corruption, and it's a matter of life and death. And Chair, let me say, when we've been grey listed, the core of the issue is we don't have enough cases, we don't have enough people who are charged, that we seem to be not strong enough to deal with all the criminal syndicates that are operating. And whether it's ESCOM, and we see the power plants and the newspaper articles, I would say Those are the most urgent of issues. It's now impacting directly on load shedding. It will impact on water. It will impact on many areas of delivery. And we need to deal with that with greater urgency. With regard to transparency, as I've said, if there are any further areas of transparency, and I think that there are, that please bring them to our attention and we will make them available. So let's look at the SACU formula. Again, that is no secret at all. In fact, ultimately, it gets overseen by the SACU Secretariat and SACU. So I don't remember offhand, but I know that SACU publishes all these numbers. There is a formula, there are calculations. What the Treasury does is we have to project it for the future. And so we project it because the two big numbers is going to be what's your revenue, your projected revenue on customs, what's your projected revenue on excise. We'll find a way of, because I'm sure it's somewhere on some website anyway through the SACU process, but we can make that available. But our numbers may not be exactly as SACU because it depends on which year, because we are projecting for the future. I think SACU does it 1 year at a time, we do 3 years. Have been raised. You know, the big issue for us as South Africa, in fact, from soon after 1994, right up to 2015, when it was the first time, really, we had an increase in tax in the early years. I'm talking of the big taxes, personal income tax, corporate income tax, and VAT. That for we increased personal income tax for the first time, the rates in 2015. And up to then, the kind of compact that we had with society was that we need to widen the base and lower the rate. So bringing more people into the tax net so that we can lower the rate. And part of that, and our approach is that we don't want to have too many incentives in our system. Tax deductions take away from your tax take. It's far better, we think, to have a lower rate for all. And that's kind of, given the stress that we've had fiscally on the revenue side, I think has been under a great challenge, and which I think, hopefully, as we improve our fiscal situation and stabilize our debt, that we can go back to those types of discussion on the tax side. I think just on the expenditures, so sorry, just to deal with, there was a comment on, and I was dealing with the grey listing. I think, yes, I agree with, I think it was Honorable Faber to say that, you know, the disbanding of the Scorpions, the whole approach to crime fighting, I think those are important, and those are issues that we've begun to reverse. If you look at the legislative changes that we've made, maybe not to the extent that we should, but I think that those are in place to get our our criminal justice system to function more efficiently. And as the minister, I think, outlined in his speech, he's focused on prioritizing fighting crime, and it's reflected in the additional allocations. Just one other comment before I get Edgar to come in, because I think on the expenditure side, yes, I think that more money needs to go to basic functions like my colleagues are looking at me. Mampo, don't stress. But I think more needs to go towards health, towards basic education. But we've got to deal then with the wage settlement, because that takes us away from making more funds available for those services. And we do need to, as the president has said, rationalize many of the public entities that we have around and that pay far too much. We need to bring them under some sort of real expenditure control, because there's very little output, I believe, many of those entities are providing. So we do need to do that type of review, and that has been announced, and I think we need to move speedily. So I hope you'll hold us accountable to make sure we do that. The last issue I want to deal with before I hand over, I think the issue of relationship with Russia and so on, The reality is, yes, when there are US, EU sanctions, there are also some of the US sanctions tend to be extraterritorial. We had some experience of that in, I think it was 2012, when there was a ban on, or limited ban on Iranian oil. And what you find is that most companies will require their dollar line, or may, especially multinational companies, will not want to risk being sanctioned by, say, the US authorities. So certainly for our entities, I think they need to take care whether they're dealing, you know, and I just say they must have their eyes wide open, that while South Africa does not recognize US or EU sanctions, we only recognize, or Russia's sanctions, we only recognize UN Security Council sanctions. The issue is we still need to look at the impact of if we are seen by, say, a particular country to break its sanctions, it could take, there could be implications. And certainly, given that almost all of our international trade is done through dollars, we need correspondent banking relationships. And that's why even for the gray listing, to get our financial sector not to be part of the action plan was important, that there will be consequences on the country. And certainly we've talked to our colleagues, for example, in EXA, in other entities, to take that into account in how they respond. And I think this is something that we need to monitor carefully and ensure that if any entities don't inadvertently fall foul of those sanctions and some of the resulting actions that may come across. I'm just saying we need to be conscious of that and act in our own interests as well. I think that's going to be quite critical. I'll let Edgar just deal with the other issues.
Yeah, but we're at 12 minutes. You're in fact at 12 minutes 47. So can we do it in 3-4 minutes? We'll come back to you. We have time.
We at 40, Chair. Oh, okay.
Okay. It's 12:54 at the moment. Yeah, according to my phone. Yeah. Okay. It's not me. It's the iPhone. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll move very quickly. Firstly, just to respond, there were some comments about the wage bill. I think Mr. Faber made a comment about how we budget for the wage bill. Look, I think from our side, Chair, the reality is, you know, we may have different opinions about the issue, but the reality is that the public sector wage bill in South Africa is determined in terms of a process in the PSCBC that's mandated by legislation. So we don't have much of a choice in that regard through the budget process. What we've done is we've said we're not going to preempt the outcome of negotiations, but as far as how you actually budget for it, you know, the issue is, and the challenge is, that there's a legal framework in the country, and we have to operate according to that. It's not really in terms of our opinion how we do so. There was a question or a statement or a question, I think it was Honorable Toy, if I'm not mistaken, please forgive me if I'm wrong, about the GEPF. All we're saying there is that the government employees pension fund and its investor, the PIC, which invests on behalf of the GEPF, the pensions of government employees, has to have the independence to decide which investments it must make in order to protect the value of those investments. Indeed, it's a fiduciary responsibility that they have to do so. And given the fact that government instruments, government debt, there's various people who invest in government debt. And if you mandate that one particular lender must borrow to you, then that'll have an impact on the other lenders as well. And I think that that's something that we're trying to emphasize in that regard. Yes, on the issue of spending, I think we agree. Honorable Okam made the point about the injections for spending. We're saying the budget makes injections into spending, but the injections are strategic and not across the board in respect of the spending part of the budget. I couldn't quite hear everything, and my colleagues, we tried to to get it. We couldn't quite hear Siraj's comments. He was quite muffled. So perhaps if we could ask, maybe those could be sent in writing, because, sorry, Chair, we actually couldn't hear him at the time when he was speaking. But finally, Chair, there's
You
a
should have
couple of...
intervened then, to be fair. I mean, you should have intervened and said that. We wouldn't have minded, because I couldn't hear him either. I thought it's mostly me. But I know he's thinking and where he was going. If there's time, he can maybe summarize it in 2 minutes. But, you know, PBO, they find it very hard to do that. But if they can, then maybe I'll ask him to summarize it. But go ahead, please.
Yeah, the last thing, there was a couple of comments that were made, Chair, and I think for the record and for the sake of the report, it's important that we correct them. We did not say that macroeconomic policy is not about growth. Indeed, slide number 4, that's not the point that slide number 4 is making. So I think it's important that we correct that statement, which was made earlier by one of the contributors. We were making the point, and which we've made in the past, by the way, that in terms of the relative emphasis, macroeconomic policy, macroeconomic issues in South Africa need to receive a lot more attention, because a lot of our problems in terms of growing the economy are coming from there. And the ministers also made that point, including to the committee in that regard. There was also a statement that, you know, something about social grants not being about policy. We did not say that, and that's not included in the slide, that social grants are somehow not about policy. They are, and we were saying, in fact, that they are a profound fiscal policy issues. And finally, we did not say that budgets cannot address structural issues. On the contrary, the budget says the precise opposite. The budget says that structural issues in respect of public investment need to receive more attention, and in this budget, they do. I'll stop there, Chair. Thank you.
We've got 20 minutes left, colleagues. Unless there are members who desperately want to raise anything, I think we should ask a few of the civil society stakeholders, especially those who haven't spoken enough, to respond. Obviously, as the chair, I need 5 minutes at the end to arrive at some consensus. Members are reminded to shape our own views. We get a draft report, but then we can change it. We've got 3 hours on Tuesday to do that. I would prefer, if you agree, that we allow civil society stakeholders to come in, because we learn a lot too by listening to people, even if we don't agree with them necessarily on both sides, Treasury and the civil society stakeholders. So it's okay for me to do that in the first instance, start with not civil society, but in fairness to Siraj and the PBO. Can you in 2 minutes summarize what you said? And then Treasury must reply. Now, are there civil society? Okay, firstly, members, is anybody objecting to the suggestion that we focus a bit more in the limited time we have for civil society to come in where they think it's necessary, but not repeat what's been said or is written out in the text? Anybody object? No, we'd prefer to hear both sides. Good, then let's come in, Siraj. Please summarize.
Okay, Honourable Chair, can you hear me clearly this time?
I can. Can the team in Swane and Pretoria, can they hear? That's the most important thing. Can you hear, Edgar?
Okay, we can hear a little bit better now, Chair. Thanks.
Okay,
right,
thank
fine.
you very much.
If you can't hear, just raise it, please. Okay, right, go ahead, Siraj, quickly, please.
So I think the main point I was making is that the approach that, this is basically a fairly conservative economic approach that National Treasury takes to budgeting and fiscal policy is flawed, but also in terms of thinking about what are the structural problems in the economy and whether we can deal with those through just those structural reforms. The second point was that a lot of what needs to happen, and it needs to happen on increasing aggregate demand on the social side, is that money needs to go into households and into supporting the resilience of households to risk, but also their buying power, and through this, hopefully increasing aggregate demand for the kinds of goods that can lead to growth in investment and employment in different sectors, particularly manufacturing and productive services, where we can fruitfully and productively grow this economy and reverse some of the financialization that the types of policies, especially macro policies, National Treasury and Reserve Bank implementing have put in place. I also responded to the two of the charts that were put up. The one was on social spending, comparing it to other countries. And I was saying that South Africa is a huge outlier compared to all those countries, even the poorest countries in terms of inequality and in terms of unemployment. And so you can't look at what is spent on social services and talk about the social wage in isolation of that. And then I would, just to be short, I supported what Gillard was saying about that really poor entry of a graph comparing negative growth and government spending. I mean, I think that Treasury really needs to be performing better and thinking better than that. Thank you, Honourable Chair, for the opportunity.
Sorry, thanks, Siraj. Thanks for the input. Now, can we have, before Treasury replies, anybody from civil society, preferably those who haven't spoken, can you put your hand up or just come in, please? Professor Russo, your issues are largely covered. I think the Institute of Taxation and Chartered Accountants, you are covered. So is there anybody else who wants to come in, especially from the first cluster? I see Kosatu and Gilliard Isaacs. Yes, both of you. Let's start with Gilliard, because Matthew, you're here forever. Mr. Isaacs.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. And I do appreciate that I had time earlier, but the last comments by Mr. Moat do refer to inputs which we made, which I'd like to clarify because they were unfortunately incorrectly understood. The SRD, and I've just gone back to the YouTube and listened to the input. The exact quote I was responding to was the assertion that Treasury is not prescribing a decision here, referring to a policy decision on the future of the SRD grant. But that's disingenuous. By not funding the SRD grant in the two outer years, that is a de facto decision on the future of the SRD grant. On the issue of macroeconomic policy, once again, it's important to, of course, the phrasing in the slide is that macroeconomic policy is an enabler, whereas this is driven by microeconomic policies. And we take issue with that as an understanding of economic thought and evidence. Macroeconomic policy has the direct ability to be driving growth and employment. And, you know, it's ironic that National Treasury, as the institution in charge of fiscal policy, essentially says, well, our policy sphere, you know, only has this enabling role and other spheres must drive this. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you, Matthew.
No, thanks, Chair. I think just three quick issues from Honourable Okamp. On the issue of the VAT, I think we would want to agree with the lessons that Treasury is highlighting, that we can reduce the VAT on key goods as trying to help the poor, but it's very difficult to ensure the retailers passed on that charge to that benefit to the poor. We've seen that ourselves. We think a critical intervention to help the poor is actually to increase allocation for free electricity and water, to register indigent households, to make sure they register, and also to protect the SRD grant from inflation, and that hasn't been done since it came into effect. On the issue of Ukraine, Chair, look, there is a real impact upon the economy, upon workers, with the rise in fuel price because of the international oil price, which then push up electricity, food, transport, other inflationary costs that hits workers' wages. But I think we do support government's position that we need to, as South Africa, support peace, support negotiation, maintain our neutrality, so to speak, between all parties, because we're not going to resolve the war in Ukraine simply by, you know, on the backs of dead conscript soldiers. There needs to be a negotiated settlement. I think lastly, Chair, on the infrastructure front, you know, there's a real significant positive increase in the infrastructure allocations over the MTEF period. to about 903 billion rand. That's positive, especially on water, which is a huge injection, transport, rail, roads, etc. Our concern there, Chair, is that are we going to deliver on those projects? We have seen with some delays around infrastructure programs. So I think our plea really is to expedite them, make sure they're implemented, deal with the delays, deal with the issues of corruption, and of course also see how can we increase localization. So for example, Chair, about a year ago, Treasury designated cement for the infrastructure programs to be locally procured. That's good. Let's expand it to the yellow machinery, to clothes, even to the hiring of labor as well, if we're fully to realize all the benefits of it, Chair. But yeah, thanks very much, Chair. I hope I stuck to my 2 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know, you were great. Colleagues, can we move then to members? Do you have anything to say? Any member wants to put their hand up? Nope. Okay, back to Treasury. Please, look, from the way I see things, colleagues, comrades, the way I see things, there's no need to go beyond 12 o'clock because we've covered the major issues. Even where people are given, 4 minutes and so on, they didn't even get there, which I think is great because you've got written submissions. And let me remind you, please, you're meant to submit by noon today, but we can extend it for a few hours. Please, a summary of your submissions, right? It's made on Wednesday. You might want to amend it based on what we've exchanged today. But we'd like you, as the stakeholders, to summarize what you think are the key points rather than we doing it, right? Our views will be expressed in the observations and recommendations side. That belongs solely to us. And that's what we will focus on Tuesday, comrades, colleagues. Right, let's go for it. Treasury, please. We're at 12, 11. I need about 5 minutes to pull the committee meeting together in preparation for the report. So really, please, can you stick to 5 minutes?
Okay, thank you, Chair. We'll do that. Chair, I've heard some of the additional comments. I think both Siraj and Gilad, I must say, I would fundamentally disagree with some of the points they raised, and I don't think we've said, for example, what is government policy on SRD? Its cabinet has determined that policy, and we're implementing that. So I'm not sure what's meant by saying this is policy and it's not been implemented. I'll come to macro and micro policy. I'm going to ask, I'm sure you bored with Edgar and I. We're going to ask Boypuso to come in. So just hold, Chair.
Please, please. There you are. Okay.
Good morning, Chair and honorable members. Thank you very much for the questions. I think it's important to make the following clarification. Slide 4 speaks to our view of macroeconomic policy as an enabler, but that is not in any way to diminish or suggest that it doesn't have a critical role to play in the economic strategy. Contrarily, we've been quite clear in budget documentation and in the budget review itself that there are 3 elements in our assessment of what makes up the growth strategy. The macroeconomic framework is a critical component. Structural reforms are a second critical component, and an enabling environment or key enablers provided by a capable state make up the third. The reason that we had put emphasis on the second component of the 3 pillars is given the nature of the structural constraints that the economy faces at the moment, it is imperative that we expedite action in these areas. So to the extent that the economy is unable to produce enough power to power itself, enough energy to power itself, to the extent that significant constraints continue and persist in rail and other network industries, it is critical and important that we focus our attentions on these things to create the right environment to be seeing more catalytic action that puts us on a stronger and more robust recovery from an economic perspective. This, of course, is happening in a context where economic risks are incredibly high, both in the global space and in the domestic space. And these 3 elements of the growth strategy subsequently work together to ensure that we are, 1, able to weather shocks when they do exist, but 2, grow the economy in an inclusive and robust way. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you.
Just the last on, because something was said about fiscal policy as well. I think, Chair, just to underscore what my colleague has just said, what we're saying here is, and we note the, some of the arguments that are made that I guess in some respects we can, we're happy to have with people bilaterally. We have some pretty clear problems at the moment, and we have diagnosed our impediments to growth in a way I think that is clear to most people. By and large, you cannot grow an economy if you don't have sufficient electricity. You've got to address that problem. You cannot grow an economy, as we said, if your transport and logistics is not working. You cannot grow an economy if your water situation, including from a regulatory perspective, things like water licensing and so on and so forth, are not working properly. So I think, Chair, for us, the major thing is what is practically required to actually lift economic activity and actually lift the lives of people and provide opportunities for people to have jobs, to improve their livelihoods, and for the country to grow. And I think if we can focus on that and get those things going, we think that the results will speak for themselves. And I think in just a final point, again, fiscal policy plays a very important role in this regard, but in line with what I've just said, on getting some of those practical things to work, getting investment into the economy, making sure that our roads and our water infrastructure and things like this are sorted out. This budget may not go far enough in terms of what we would all like, but within the limits and the constraints that we face, in the context of very high levels of debt and debt service costs arising from that are now crowding out other items of expenditure, in the context of a very pressurized households and businesses and that require relief with the high cost of living. In other words, we really need to be careful in saying we're going to just raise taxes, for example. In that context, putting more money into these areas is very important. And I would really refer members and refer all the stakeholders that are here to the details that we provide in Annexure D of the budget review, where we talk in detail about what we're trying to do on the infrastructure side, to create jobs, to improve our water infrastructure, to improve roads, to improve our energy infrastructure, and so forth. These are the practical things that we are trying to focus on and trying to get going.
We get it, Edgar, we get it. What's your point?
I would like to refer members to that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair, for the opportunity.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. Now we must draw to a close, colleagues, given that there isn't an incentive to continue. So a few things very quickly. On the widow's voice thing, is there any problem in what we've suggested based on the meeting yesterday and the discussions we had? Younger, and as far as you will present, I think you've had many meetings with them. I think they've been active since 2015 on this issue. They have a right to be heard. And as Dennis rightly says, they need a full answer. You said you gave it to them, but now give it to Parliament and sort the issues out personally. We don't want to know what the outcome is. Simply it's done within 3 months. That should go into the report. Can Esther and Sakele, please, when we take a decision as a committee, please try as far as possible to use the same words, because then it avoids us having the two chairs to redo sections, right? So we've taken a decision on that. Is there anybody objecting to that? You can also object on Tuesday to the wording, right? I don't see any hands up. Do you, Nkululeko, Alan? No. Okay. Next point is, by the way, the co-chair has been connected to our meeting. I'm not aware. I couldn't find him on the list here, but it seems he was connected to us. I don't know how. And he's now withdrawn because he's in that other meeting, and he was in both meetings for a while. On the car issue, I think we should, you've already done the work. Just repeat what was said in your submission to the Treasury to respond to today. Put all that down. And I think you should add that one of the chairpersons has engaged with the parliamentary councillor to the president several times. So there's also those engagements. The presidency referred the matter to Treasury. Treasury is referring the matter back to the presidency. And the committee feels that it is not a matter for the committee to decide. It's an executive matter, and that either the presidency or Treasury, preferably the latter because they're accountable directly to us, should respond within 14 days so that there's closure on this matter. This is Parliament. People cannot keep coming and raising the same points over and over again. I don't think it's fair either, because Parliament looks bad, that the executive, the presidency is not above the Parliament. And so, you know, the parliamentary councils are meant to do this. So, you know, we don't want to mention names, but the parliamentary councillor, I've spoken to him many times, just nothing happens. And then it gets referred to Treasury. So we're not interested really. We want to reply in 14 days. Doesn't mean we agree or disagree with Professor Rousseau. There's nothing special about him. It's just another stakeholder, as he himself will admit. But Parliament, it's us. The matter is ours, not his, not anybody else's. It's we. We have to do our job. So I don't think we need a discussion on that, but is anybody objecting to that? How many years is it? 6 years now. It's outrageous. I've never come across something like this before. Okay. In the exit report, Professor Rousseau and others, we did inform the National Assembly Committee is an outstanding issue. And Joe Maswangani rightly said on Wednesday that he's aware it was handed to him. Now, on the numbers that SACU requires, on the SACU matter, the fines, I think, firstly, Treasury, you have no choice, right? The Constitution binds you as it does us. Whatever is constitutionally necessary, give the information to Parliament. As for Professor Rousseau's request about this evening, if the figures are available, not completely, maybe you can make it available, but I'm not sure that the committee wants to insist that it happens this evening, but within 7 days, give Parliament the information. That is something we can put in the report. Now, is there any member that wants it done by 5 o'clock or end of business midnight tonight? No, I don't see anybody's hand up. You can just butt in if you can't use that system. Nobody is saying that, Professor Rousseau, so you'll have to wait within 7 days to get it. But that is a resolution of ours, right? Amandla Mobi has asked for evidence provided unless you can give us in Parliament a reply from a lawyer, and we'll refer it to our lawyers, that says you are not constitutionally required to give the information that they have asked for. And on SRDs, please provide what was asked. On the matter of the employment tax incentive, you have presented that slide at the end, I see. Sean made the point, basically, if I understood him correctly, and may not have, and I'll look at his stuff over the weekend, but he seemed to be saying that the figures you gave are not accurate, right? So it would be useful to also just reply to that in your section of the report. So we put it down there, and then he must engage with you further if he wants, or unless Parliament feels that you're not giving accurate information to us, and then we take it up as our issue. I also think that, I really like what Michael said about, we can have a robust exchange without attacking people individually. And that's so rare in our society broadly. And even in Parliament, it does happen that we go completely off the rails, really, in my view anyway, and members are free to disagree. But I really agree with you, Sean. Michael, I think you're absolutely right. Finally, I want to make my own subjective observation. I hope others agree. I think this has been a very high quality debate, really. Very, very high. But ultimately, colleagues, comrades, this is not, sorry, I'm having some internet issues. This is not it's not an academic forum. Ultimately, whatever we learn from the experts on both sides, we have to make decisions and we have to act on them. So it's great to be part of a wonderful discussion, but ultimately, as the public would be interested, as rightly they should, what are we going to do about it? What actions are we going to take beyond writing a report where we put recommendations? Mercifully, the National Assembly Committee every quarter meets with SARS and Treasury to look at progress on these reports. We are unable to do it on the NCOP side because we're the same committee in appropriations and finances, right? Now, Dennis made a point, I don't know why he wilted or maybe he forgot, or we did together yesterday, that we would like a report from you, Yanga, and your team, the acting DGs here, and SARS on the widow's voice matter, and then just monitor the situation in your quarterly reports. So they can give us a report, but then when you have your first quarter report, Noxie, and the NA committee, please look at this issue so that we can tie it up. Now, is there anything that members feel strongly about right now before the draft report is sent to you that you want raised. On the water issue, I entirely agree. I think Momo and others, you will agree. I'm sure all of us will agree. What is looming for us on water is far, far worse than what we currently have with Eskom. They have yet further deterioration in that respect with Eskom. So really, we should note that. Obviously, it's the Water Resources Committee that must deal with this, but I think that's correct. I think Treasury, you're more aware of this technically than we are, and the other experts here will say the same thing. We should just note that and urge that Parliament as a whole, we too, exercise some oversight over this matter. Having said that, is there anything members want to raise as an urgent issue that you want to put into the report? And then we can decide whether we agree or disagree next week, Tuesday. No? Right, we're done. Just 1 minute over according to my clock. I want to thank everybody, particularly the civil society stakeholders, for your patience and tolerance with the way this meeting's been chaired, and some of you were cut off almost close to mid-sentence. I apologize for that, but there's no other choice. We have these 3-hour meetings with the bandwidth we have, and it being Friday, people have got flights, some of them anyway. So here we are. We will now see what comes of the report, and more importantly, what happens over the next year and thereafter. Right, anything else? Any members got anything to say? Nope, okay, thank you very much. Thank you all, particularly civil society stakeholders, but Treasury too. Okay, bye.